welcome back to Cinema Pursuit. This week we have a first time guest, but someone I've been doing quite a bit of podcast work with. I like to introduce Martin Padilla. What's up, man? How's everything?
How are you doing, man? I'm doing good. How you been since I last saw you?
Everything's good. You're one of the two people where I randomly had the opportunity to finally meeting you, or life happens and we had a good time. We went to Videodrome, we ate ramen. I appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, life has been happening for me quite a bit recently with a lot of, I guess you could say, like mutuals online. There's another mutual of mine that I'm actually meeting at the end of the month who happens to just live in Tennessee, and I'm visiting up there for my girlfriend and I's anniversary. So we're going to be meeting with him at some point as well.
That's awesome. And today we are talking about Blade Runner. This movie sits on your Letterboxd top 4, right? I mean, how long has it been there? I assume you don't change it too much, right?
I have never changed my Letterboxd top 4. I know that
Okay.
there are people out there who do they change it like every few weeks or so. I have never once changed mine. Ever since I got the app, I have always kept it the same.
Me, it's like once in a while I might go back and forth,
Mhm.
once every 3-4 months. But besides that, it's pretty consistent for me. I don't know how people they have, because you have pro or whichever patron, they can change the
Mhm.
whole theme. If it's horror season, they change it to that. I mean, good for
Yeah.
people. I don't have the
I
tenacity
have the
for that.
patron version. I have the patron version, and it's quite literally for the stupidest reason ever. It's to change the posters on the.
Posters. I love that, man. I mean, Letterbox it does plenty, but I will say you're one of the first people that we've had on the pod that's actually artist, filmmaker, that's actually in this stuff. And I did watch Off the Face of the Earth a couple nights ago.
Really now?
And no, I wanted to ask you, I'm like, so is that a glimpse of the sort of stories that you want to tell? Because it's very much almost like a scene from a movie and very personal story. Things are going on. What's up?
I I would say yes, there's stories that I want to tell, but I remember reading an interview. I can't remember with who, like a director, but it's always the same thing you hear every time. It's work within your resources, work within what you have. And so I remember for a long time outside of leaving high school, I thought, pursuing filmmaking was unrealistic, especially living in somewhere like Oklahoma. So I just kind of gave up on that part of my life. I was like, I'll just keep enjoying movies. I will do whatever I want with it, but I'm not going to go out of my way to create a film that no one's going to watch, especially living here in Oklahoma, because just being there is like no one really appreciates the art the same way that I ever did. I did meet friends who were into film, but it was also still just a very niche thing. And then I met my girlfriend who is an actress, and she went to school pretty close to where I was living. And she was telling me about all these opportunities that she wanted to do. And I remember thinking, like, if she can do it, then I can too. And so I started to kind of look at my resources, and I was like, I can do dialogue. I can do that really well. And I can just place this kind of story wherever I need to. And that was just happened to be by an inconspicuous lake that looked beautiful to me. I went there all the time on my walks. But then also she had friends who were actors, and that was the other person who was in the film. His name's Will Warner, wonderful actor,
Oh
awesome
yeah.
dude, just great friend all around. But I remember thinking I just sat down and I was writing dialogue as much as I could, and I was really inspired by Richard Linklater's sort of stories, the way that he kind of writes. There's not a
That's
lot
what
of
I was thinking
resources,
about, man.
but you
That's what I
can
was
very
thinking
much,
about.
yeah. But it was stuff like that. Like Paul Thomas Anderson Magnolia, for example, was one that I think very, very lightly influenced and kind of inspired the new short I'm working on right now that we're finishing up and hopefully will be out very soon. But yeah, I would say very dialogue heavy movies is what I'm working with right now for that reason. It's working within your resources and not having a budget, but knowing that two actors in the dialogue that they carry can really influence a story.
A literally Linklater made a trilogy out of it, right? And arguably one of the best trilogies ever made, the Before trilogy.
One of the most beautiful trilogies I've ever seen. I actually found that trilogy, and it was one of the first Criterions I ever bought. I think you could probably see it back here, but yeah, it's legitimately like one of those movies that I changed my life entirely. I thought this is filmmaking. Like you can do a whole movie where people are just talking about their feelings and art and just their lives, and people would care about it.
You said Linklater. For me, what I think I'm going to go back to 2013. My realization, I think it was 2012, 2013. I saw Take Shelter and I saw Mud pretty much within a couple months.
Mhm.
And Jeff Nichols, when it comes to Mud, I was like, this could have been shot an hour from here. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
this feels like an actual Southern movie. It's set in a very simple place. the story itself is fantastic. And I was like, oh, these things can actually be done, and it doesn't have to be some grand scale thing to have this effective story. And
Yeah, Mud's a
obviously,
great
Matthew
example as
McConaughey,
well, yeah.
Michael Shannon. We were just talking about Michael Shannon, right?
Yeah.
The king. And it's like he just puts the whole movie onto Michael Shannon, and Shannon's the one who just takes it and runs with it, right?
Yeah. My girlfriend, I mentioned she went to school next to where I was kind of living at the time, and she went to school for drama, but it was more like play, like theater drama.
Yeah.
And so because of that, she's introduced me to a lot of really, really awesome plays that are very dialogue heavy. And because of that, I've kind of been diving more into like the theatrical side of things. She's also shown me a lot of movies that were originally plays, and I'm like, "Oh, well, this is really great. I love the dialogue in this." And every time that she says that the movie could work as a play, I'm like, "Oh, well, this actually was a play before." Like, it makes a lot of sense, and it's vice versa. She'll show me a movie, and I'll be like, "This could work really well as a play," and she'll be like, "Oh, well, this was a play." So, like, Tracy Letts' August
Oh,
Osage County was one that she found online. We were driving home to see my parents in Oklahoma, so it was a 12-hour drive. We listened to the entire play on the way there. We listened to another Arthur Miller play. She's just shown me a number of incredible works that I think about, and I'm like, I could do this if I had the resources. It's just a matter of, the actors and having so many people that you can do, but easily one of those things where you could have one setting and it would work really well. And that's, I think, something I'm trying to work with right now.
and you could say maybe like Tennessee Williams. There's a lot of Tennessee Williams work that's
Mhm.
been adapted. One of my favorite movies, 12 Angry Men, literally one of my dad's favorite movies too. If you want to talk, that man'll talk your head off about the genius of that movie, of it just being one room and you have 12 actors, or maybe a little bit more, but like
Mhm.
the total magnificence of just, okay, we're gonna have this story and it's just full of drama. It's better than most drama we get nowadays. Like
Oh, yeah.
truly.
Did you look at my letterbox top 4? Because that's in there as well.
It is. Oh,
It
bro.
is. It's at the very top, actually. I think that's, like, one of my all-time favorites, and it's because of the dialogue. It's because of so much of the setting. I
Bro,
think
every
when I
all the
look at
stuff he
my
does with the camera, with the lenses, like, as the
yeah.
movies progress, bro.
I think one of those things that, like, when I look at my top 4, it kind of exemplifies the kind of movies I wanna make in the sense that, like, I think of, like, 12 Angry Men as the dialogue heavy stuff that I'm working with right now. I could definitely do. And then I look at films like Blade Runner, which is definitely kinda where I wanna end up going in my career later on once I'm able to kind of get access to that, hopefully. But then Donnie Darko is something, like, super indie that I'm, like, really into that I'm like, I could definitely get somebody to do, and it's just kind of a more obscure film that I could absolutely really dive into and really explore.
I'm gonna have to send you what Jeff Nichols is talking about after Bike Riders. He's like, we're at a festival where it's like, a lot of students, filmmakers, and he
Mhm.
was like, you just have to find people. It doesn't necessarily have to be Hollywood, but you just have to find people that are willing to give you the money to make these stories. And
Yeah.
he went from, like Shotgun Stories, his first movie's literally like family financed. He had a furniture store. He doesn't talk about it there. He talks about it on the Deacons podcast, but it's like where there's a will, there's a way. And you never know what can happen.
Funny enough, Linklater also kinda mentioned the same thing on a lot of
Slackers,
his
yeah.
own interviews. Slackers, I mean, is a great example of it, and it's practically made for no budget, and now it's in the Criterion Collection. It's sitting on my shelf, so that kind of shows you a great example of, like, inspiration on my part.
So I don't know. Right before we get into Blade Runner, do you know that Christopher Nolan? I think it was 2014, the year that Interstellar Boyhood came out. They were on a,
The Round Table, yeah.
and then he literally turns to Linklater. He's like, "Yeah, Slackers. That's what really
Yeah.
inspired me."
I mean, Nolan is one of those directors that I think gets tossed around a lot in the general sense that people are like, "Oh, well, he's the best filmmaker of all time," and that's awesome. He makes really great pieces of cinema, and that's really cool to say. I mean, we've been having a whole filmmaker retrospective over on the Commentary Pod. Shout out Pat Brennan, my boy. But the fact is the same year that Memento was released was the same thing with Donnie Darko. Like, people were scared of those movies because they didn't know how to market them, and he was a huge advocate for Donnie Darko. He was a huge advocate for Linklater as well. Like, he is the coolest guy in Hollywood, I think, right now.
I was listening to Jonathan Nolan talk about, or he was talking about Fallout, but he's talking about Nolan at the same, his brother Christopher Nolan at the same time. And Jonas says that they finished the movie. They shot Memento. He was on set for that. They wrapped post, and they're like, "We have this fantastic movie. Now let's go sell this movie." And they ran it around Hollywood. No one wanted to buy the movie. It was like 3 or 6 months later, and somehow Steven Soderbergh got a copy of the movie, and then he would
Mhm.
be at parties at Hollywood just berating studio heads like, why hasn't anybody bought this movie? what are y'all doing? If y'all don't buy this movie, then you literally do not understand what cinema is. And the reaction they did get whenever they were going around showing the movie was like, oh, we really love the movie, but audiences aren't going to understand this.
I
And that's
think
the
studio
problem.
heads often don't trust audiences, which is
They don't,
unfortunate, and it's I
yes,
think the biggest thing that's happening right now as well is that they keep giving us remakes, they keep giving us new
Kingdom of the
studio
Planet
IP
Apes.
every year. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which was really good, by the way, no knock on that, but then we have 30 Avengers movies, and it's like, why are we getting a 30th version of this, and we could be getting a first new original film? Like, that interview that happened at the Oscars this year, it's like, let's just take all of these movies and make 20 small ones instead.
Core Jefferson, yep.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
100% agree with the man. But let's get into Blade Runner. What are your memories for Blade Runner?
So, Blade Runner was one of those movies I found whenever I had, like, just really started to get into, like, really serious cinema. Don't get me wrong, I've always loved movies my entire life. I've grown up watching movies. I always watched movies in such a sense that I could watch whatever came my way. Like, it never bothered me that a film was 3 hours long. So, when I was about 16 years old, I started working at a movie theater as a projectionist, and those were very formative years for me for a few reasons. Being a projectionist, I definitely took advantage of the fact that I had access to all these projectors and I had access to people who definitely had more of a knowledge on film than I did. Because of that, I remember every single check that I got. Actually, the first check I got, I literally spent the entire thing on a pair of Star Wars shoes. You remember, like, the Star Wars Van
Yeah,
special editions?
yep.
I got that pair of shoes, and then
Yep.
that same day I went to, like, this used movie store, and I would seek out direct, Tarantino films, and I'd watch them in order. I'd order all of the Nolan films and watch them in order, and then I can't remember who mentioned it to me, but they were telling me I should watch Blade Runner, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll check it out." It's I ordered the Blu-ray online, and it came to my doorstep, but it had 3 different discs in it, and so I was like, "Which one do I watch? Like, which one's the best one?" And they were just like, "Watch all of them. Find out which one you like." And I was like,
Bro,
"Okay," because there was a director's cut, there was a regular version, like the original cut, and there was a final cut. I watched the original cut for the first time, and I, like, absolutely hated it. I was like, it's trying so hard to be something else." And I think that was whenever I was like, my first real original thought about a movie. I was like, "This is trying to be something else. Like, this is trying really hard to be this movie." And then I gave it a few weeks, and I watched the director's cut, and I was like, "I hate this even more." And then I gave it a few weeks, and I watched it again, and I watched the final cut, and I was like, "Okay, this is what it should have been from the beginning." And going back and watching the original cut and the director's cut, I don't hate them as much as I used to. I think that there's still really good stuff there.
but today we're talking about Final Cut and Final Cut only. That's just me.
Yes, yeah. Final
I
cut, it's hard to
yeah,
kinda go back and watch a film that you have seen like, a different version of because you're only living with that version in your head. For example, if you go back and watch the Lord of the Rings theatrical cuts, like, there is a knowledge in your head of what happens between those scenes that were taken out, so it's like, even if those scenes aren't there, you still kind of enjoy it.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I would say that the final cut was the version that I really loved. But after work, every time that I was there, I would take movies with me. And that was when I watched the final cut, was I just stayed after work. It was like 11 o'clock. I had a pair of keys to just lock the place up, and it was like middle of the night. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna watch this tonight. And I just watched it and I had a blast with it. It was one of the most formidable experiences I've ever had. Like, I was in there in that theater sitting alone, and that's how I watched a lot of movies.
That's awesome. The way to have the opportunity to do that, and especially Blade Runner of all movies,
Oh,
that's just
I did it with so many movies whenever I was working there. Like, I watched every single Game of Thrones episode in that theater, I think.
bro, that's awesome. That's one show where it's like, oh, they finally started living up to that production value that comes with the HBO budget.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think the first 2 seasons, I was, like, watching them at home, and then progressively as the show went on, I would take
Oh
the
yeah.
movies with me to or I would take the discs with me to work, and then just between movies or after movies before we opened, I would just watch an episode or 2, and then that's how I caught up on the show.
When it comes to Blade Runner, I have told you a little bit of this story, and it was I think you I was 11 or 12. I would, my parents worked all day, like they worked 70 plus hours a week, and the closest place we had was a public library. We didn't have like really good internet, circa 2012 or not 2012, 2010. So I'd go there with my brother. We'd do our homework on the computers, and then you literally have books, magazines, and you have movies. So
Yeah. We
every
had a
week,
library like that as well.
or not every week, pretty much every day, I had just stacks on stacks of DVDs, and I could just go through. I'd read the DVD. Of course, I mean, I didn't know what IMDb was, when I was 11,
Yeah.
but I'd read the DVD. I remember reading the Village DVD, and it said the scariest movie you'll ever see. And I literally put it on. I watched it with my brother and my dad, and then I'm like, this is not scary. What is this?
It's just like a pull quote from like a critic or something.
Credit. Yep, yep. I have to give a movie a reappraisal at some point. But me and my brother, we watched Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. We watched the Indiana Jones movies, returned those, and I was like, oh, there's another movie, another sci-fi action movie from Harrison Ford. Ooh, Blade Runner. Let me get that. I turn it on. We pretty much watched the first scene, the processing scene with the owl, everything. We watched about 20 minutes and we're like, this is boring. And just turned it off, returned it, didn't think about it for about like 5 years. And then I'm like scrolling YouTube watching, like, this is high school at this point. Yeah, 2012-ish. And I'm looking at videos and Frank Darabont. Do you know who Frank Darabont is?
Yes, sir.
Blade, Shawshank, all that stuff. And there's just a random interview. It's like 2 minutes, and he's talking about Tears of Rain, like that scene. And
Uh-huh.
he's like,
The
"Oh, he's
tears in
like,
the rain scene.
yeah." And he's like he's holding this bird, and it's just one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And then I hear this thumping, like the narration, because that's the first cut he saw, and he was
Mhm.
just bashing them. And I was like, "What is this movie?" And then I went back, rewatched the movie, and it hit like a bag of rocks because I was like,
Mhm.
oh, I actually like this. The music, fantastic. The scenes are fantastic. It's a sci-fi movie. It's a cop movie, very much a detective movie. But everything in between of like the generic, not generic per se, but the generic pieces of plotting, there's something
Yeah.
there
There's a formula to
spiritually.
everything, yeah.
There's a
Do you
spiritual thing
feel
there.
like because you were so young when you tried to watch it, that's why you didn't enjoy it the first
Oh,
time? Because I
100%.
genuinely feel like there's a lot of movies that I have gone back and watched and been like, "Oh, I needed to grow up. That's why I didn't like this movie."
Yep. And I had a friend after that, skipped like 2 years ahead pretty much, and I was, senior year of high school, I was trying to make some sort of documentary about film, and
Mhm.
I have the recording. I don't have the video files themselves, but I do have, like, recordings I had on my phone as, like, backup audio, and it's kinda bad, but I'm essentially pestering one of my friends that was a filmmaker about, like, what's a scene that like really changed your life. And this man, he was talking about of the studio system and how, like, after days of, what's the Michael Cimino, Heaven's Gate, after that, no,
Heaven's
was it,
Gate, yes.
yeah, they're like, they stopped giving people money, and he's like, wait, you don't actually want that in there. And then he just skips ahead. I keep like, keep badgering him, and then he turns on, Tears of the Rain. And the way he talks about it, he's like, oh, paraphrasing what he said, he's like, I am happy, I am proud to be of the same species that produced this. It gives me hope for humanity. And it was like one of the first times that, like, in person at least, that I heard someone talk that passionately about film. And that, I don't know. Every time I think about Blade Runner, I think about that.
It's a very
Blade Runner's
affecting
all
film.
around my life.
I find Blade Runner to be one of those movies that is one of the most humanistic films, like, about humanity that is not about humans, and it's incredible to watch. Like, I don't know who said it, and I wanna say it was a filmmaker of some sort, but saying that sci-fi filmmaking or sci-fi in general, stories at its core every time is about humanity in some way, shape, or form, and I feel like this is one that really resonates with that idea.
For me, it's always, I think that good sci-fi always gives you questions. It poses questions. It doesn't necessarily
Mhm.
give you an answer. It might show you an answer, but it never is like, oh, this is the answer. This is what I think. The great sci-fi doesn't do that because
Right.
it
It's
could be
an answer, though. That's a great yeah, I like that.
because it could be Terminator 2. That's very much science fiction to
Mhm.
me. But it's like, it literally gives me, makes my skin crawl watching that. Where it's like, okay, obviously it gave James Cameron nightmares. It's going to give me nightmares because this is a future that probably could happen.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Some good stuff in this movie. I think the first and second movie are both like, they both capture that idea really well.
We're going to talk about Blade Runner 2049 because that's something we're definitely going to get into a little bit later. But I do want to, you're talking about the elements themselves for
Mhm.
Blade Runner. And do you know where the idea came from? Like, where it originated from for Philip K. Dick? Because I found this out doing my research. It really
I
it made
I
my skin crawl.
remember reading about it whenever I watched the movie, because I remember I ended up reading the novel too, the "What Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?"
Yep.
And I wish I still had my copy of it because it was like an actual copy that had like the Blade Runner poster on it and everything. So it was
Yep.
like a
Yep.
tie-in for the movie, but
Yep. I've
it
read
did
it. Yep.
say, and it was a really cool novel, but it doesn't feel anything like the movie.
And yeah, that's the thing. It's like he was talking about how he wrote it during Vietnam. There's obvious, things about existentialism, the the personalities of the androids themselves. But besides, the Vietnam War, the reason where like the inception of the idea came from when he's researching Man in the High Castle. You know the book,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
So
I didn't read it, but I know about it.
yeah, and they made the show on Amazon and all that sort of stuff. A lot of Philip K. Dick. The man,
Mhm.
he died before he could see Blade Runner. That he died, back then. But his inspiration, Minority Report, that's a movie that changed my life too. That's
Yeah.
probably why Blade Runner did too. But he was talking about how for Man in the High Castle, I think it's 1962, he was at like USC. He was at a college in California reading Gestapo, like these German SS soldiers' diaries, literal written
Yeah.
diaries. And I actually have the quote. He said, the sentence read from the diary: "We are kept awake at night by the cries of starving children." And there's obviously something wrong with the man who wrote that. I later realized with the Nazis, what we were essentially dealing with was a defective group mind, a mind so emotionally defective that the word human could not be applied to them. And you could pull
Damn.
that all the way back to where it's like the entire point of Blade Runner is that the most human characters, the ones that actually like value life, is quite
Are the ones
literally
that
the
aren't even
people.
human. Yeah.
Exactly. And I gotta
Yeah.
ask you, what do you think it means to be human in this context of Blade Runner?
That's a tough question. What it means to be human. I want to say, like, if you ask me this question on any given day, I might have a different answer, but I would say to show empathy, probably. I think that's the biggest thing that this film kind of, well, it's what kind of drives this film as well as the sequel. It's what kind of drives Kay's character in 2049. It's what drives Harrison Ford's character in this movie. It's what drives a lot of the characters' motivations in general, just across the entire franchise. Yeah, it's a weird thing to kind of think about empathy being a human thing when it seems like the most basic thing, but I feel like at its core, it's kind of the biggest thing that you see in sci-fi, given what you see in, like I said, like humanity is the core of what you see in the story. Isaac Asimov's characters in Foundation, or even
Yep.
iRobot he wrote. Solaris is a great example. Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris.
Yep.
So much of those stories have to do with empathy, the way that we kind of perceive empathy, how that empathy kind of affects the other characters. Avatar, as much as it is kind of memed and joked around at this point, I love Avatar. I should
I
just say
do
that off
too.
the bat. James Cameron's Avatar is an insane movie. It's incredible. But so much of that sci-fi aspect to it is only driven by empathy. The reason for him to want to care about someone, to care about the Na'vi, to care about the people, to care about his legs, to care about being human and what it means to be and what it has to have a soul.
Yep. For me, it goes down to, I think it's we as humans more than any other. No, not more than, but we are the only species on Earth that has a chance of free will. We're given the opportunity of free will, and what we do with that is either we are humane and we actually act as humans and we practice empathy and understanding of each other, this world, everything in between, or the case of what happens in the 2019 world of Blade Runner, that all the humans are pretty much divesting and they're apathetic. They're almost left over on Earth, right?
Mhm.
And obviously, like the ones that are trying to figure out their life they're the replicants. I listened to Ridley talk about the movie, and he said the name for replicants came from one of the writers. His daughter was working in some sort of a genetic lab, and
Mhm.
they're making clones. And he's like, and she was just casually talking to her dad, and she's like, "Yeah, it's like we're working on replicants and all this and that." He's like, "Replicants? Wait, hold up. We're not going to use the word android. We're not going to use the word robot, but replicants. It sounds compelling, and I don't think anybody in the past like 40 years has come up with a better word than replicant."
I think there's probably like other words for that kind of idea, but I don't think now that I think about it, like you're saying, like anything as compelling as that, because it's like, yeah, we could use the word android or robot, or I guess like Dune may have some sort of idea for a clone, which
Oh,
is
oh yes, say it.
but even then, it's blanking on me right now. Like that's
Oh,
how
oh,
compelling it is. Like
Duncan comes back as the, whatever the thing,
well,
right?
I know his character's name, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a Gula. A Gula is what it's called, I believe. But
yeah.
yeah, it's yeah, spoiler for Dune Messiah. Sorry for anybody listening in
You know, oh, my
2024,
bad,
2025.
my bad.
But yeah. I mean, the idea is essentially that I mean, the same thing with Frank Herbert though, right? You have these
Yep.
compelling ideas, writers who are ahead of their time. Yeah, Replicants is such a cool name. I don't know how they could have come up with that at all.
Yeah. I love it, and it's one of those things where it's like you can mull over ideas, and then once you hear that right thing, I don't know about how it is for you, but it's like once you hear what is like
Mhm.
meant to
It is
be here,
absolutely that way.
then you just like the water flows, like your mind is clear, and I that's
It's like I'm that exact same way with my writing with I'll write like a whole screenplay and I'll think to myself, "You know what? I'm gonna write this stupid scene as a placeholder, and then once I think of something better, I will come back and I will fix it." And that is every time how it's gone. Like I'll be out with friends, somebody will mention something, and I'll be like, "I'm gonna write that down when I get home. I'm gonna change this entire scene." So
uh,
yes, it's
Matt
very much that way.
Matt Reeves talks about how he keeps little books and he just writes in them and he writes scenes, he writes ideas, and he'll just write everything. And once it's full, he'll store it away. And once in a while, he'll make a movie, come back to those things, and he's reading through trying to find an idea for a new movie, and be like, "Oh, that's okay, that clicks. Let me do this." Or he'll be like, "Oh, I already applied this thing into this movie, and I wasn't even thinking about it." It's just one of those
Yeah.
things where it's like our minds
Ideas are
subconsciously think
universal.
about it.
They're ideas are so universal in the sense that they're the story that I had for this first short that I did, the Off the Face of the Earth, was the a completely different script when I started it, and then as I was writing it, I was like, "This doesn't work," and the idea just changed slightly, and I was like, "This is so much better." So, yeah, ideas are so universal. If you just write down your ideas, at some
And
point or another, you will use them.
oh, I have a thing in my phone that it's literally okay. I have a journal, I have my regular notes, and then I have one that says writing and then riffs. So it's like it
Yeah.
could be a scene, it could be an idea, it could literally be something like, oh, I saw like it could be a guy changing his shirt outside in a parking lot. That says a lot
Mhm.
about a character without saying anything about a character. Like it could just be a dialogue scene, he's changing his shirt, and it means it like shows you what you know, the confidence he has or like something about him, depending on how you're framing
He
it
doesn't
and
wanna
all
be
that
seeing
sort of
that
stuff.
shirt kinda thing, yeah.
Yeah,
Have you seen David Fincher's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, right?
of course.
Well, yeah, we talked about this at dinner, we talked about this at ramen, but I was watching the his version of the film, like, his adaptation, and after reading the book, I mean,
Yeah,
obviously, the book's incredible as well,
Stieg
but,
Larsson.
yeah, Stieg Larsson's incredible novels. If you haven't read these books, go ahead and read them, but
The
in the
first three,
opening
the first
scene
three.
first 3 are great, yeah, but the opening scene, like, after the whole, like, opening credits, which are incredible as well, but there's a scene where Daniel Craig is, like, smoking a cigarette or he asks for a pack of cigarettes, and then he throws the whole pack away after smoking 1 cigarette, and David Fincher said that he wanted to include that scene to basically show, "Hey, he's quit smoking, but he's gonna indulge this one time." Like, how do we show that he's quit smoking and he's past this? Just buy a pack, smoke the one, and then throw it away.
And I love, and when it comes to actors, there's so many little details, especially in that movie. One of my favorite details is this right here, where
Oh, the glasses,
the
yeah.
glasses, he does this, and you know what? I was like 18, like 16, 17, 18. I saw this movie so many times. I do this in my life now because it's Daniel
Yeah.
Craig. But it's like,
He'll also, like, hold the glasses, like, in his mouth, like, all the time, like, just, like, holding
yep.
them like a toothpick. Yeah.
But
It's
it's
a
like
great movie.
it is. But back to Blade Runner because I do love Dragon Tattoo. It's gonna happen. I've seen the movie 5 plus times. Every time I watch it, it's just a fun ride. Or I shouldn't say fun ride. It's a messed up movie, but it's extremely compelling.
Oh, it's a good procedural, I think as Pat would say.
I love procedurals. So I do have a question for you. Deckard,
Okay.
is he
He is.
okay? He
He's a
is. Okay,
replicant.
see,
He's a replicant.
for
You didn't even have to finish that question. He is absolutely a replicant.
this is something that Ridley has vehemently, he's like, of course he's a replicant, and Harrison Ford just messing with people. He's like, yeah, he's not a replicant. He's not a
Yeah.
replicant. but recently, in probably the last couple years, he was on GQ or something like that, and they're doing an interview. I was like, yes, of course I know he's a replicant, but it's just corny. It's like it's better if I believe in my soul that he is not a replicant. So it's like I can play
That's
the character better.
I think if I'm being honest, the aspect of him saying that he's not a replicant in the movie or even thinking that he's a replicant kind of relates back to Kay's dilemma in the second movie with him not believing that he's or him believing that he's the child for like a good portion of the movie.
And
Um,
the beauty of that, the tension of it, the every single time I watch it is fantastic. I love it.
yeah. I think it's so much more compelling that he doesn't know he's replicant for like a good majority of the film and then at the very end just realizes it. Like it's so there are multiple moments throughout the film where you can kind of see, I mean, you know, the whole thing with replicants, how like their eyes reflect like a
Yep.
cat's.
Yep.
There's a few moments you can catch Harrison Ford's eyes doing that, and they're really quick. Like they're very intentional. So yeah, he's definitely a replicant. And I think the way that his character kind of like finds out about it at the end, it's so much more effective to me.
Oh yeah. And man, I love the ending for this movie. Just Edward James Olmos's character, he
Oh yeah.
comes at some point into the house, Gaff comes in the house and he leaves the little, the origami. And I'm like, and without the narration, it's like, oh, okay, now we understand the story. It's like he's gonna use this one chance of like the little time he's gonna have with Sean Young's Rachel, and he's just gonna try to actually live as a human. And that's what Kay does ultimately in the movie, right? That even though he finds
Mhm.
out that he is a replicant and all that sort of stuff, he makes the most human choice that he's going to fight as much as he can with love and try to get, Harrison and his daughter back together. And just goosebumps. That's how you do it. And I think, or we're going to talk about it because we're going to talk about Blade Runner at some point, like 2049, because the
No,
genius of that
just
movie.
bring me back for that. Just bring me back for that
Oh,
episode.
I
I would
have
love
to.
that for
We're
so much. Yeah.
contracted now, brother. We are contracted because it's very much a spiritual conversation. I think that is like,
Yeah.
it's very rare that you make a legacy movie where it's like the pieces are intertwined now. It's not like, oh,
Yeah.
this is better than this one. No, it's like there's very much a latitude of like there's parallels that are going back and forth between both movies, and there's a beauty
Both
behind
incredible
that.
films.
I'm glad to hear that. Like I told you, I saw Blade Runner 2049 three times within 4 days, and that's one of the best things I've ever done.
I watched that movie back to back at the movie theater when I worked there because I had to watch all of them beforehand whenever we showed them. So the night I think it was like the Wednesday night before it came out, it was like 10 o'clock, and a friend of mine worked there with me, and I was like, "Hey, I'm about to catch Blade Runner if you want to watch it with me." And he was like, "Yeah, sure." So we both watched it together, and there was like a number of moments where, and it was just us in the theater, so we could just yell as much as we want. I was like, "What? Like, what is going
Yes,
on?" Like just
yes.
yelling out, like, "This can't be real! Like, this is insane for the story." And the minute that movie was over, I was like, "I'm watching that again, dude."
I've done the watch a movie the same night maybe about five
Mhm.
times, and every time, or not every time, maybe two or three times I've done it. It is fantastic. If the text of the movie is fantastic, that is to say,
Yeah.
right?
You almost
Where
have to
it's
like
like,
restudy it. Like you have to like really pay attention to be like, okay, this is all the stuff I missed like the second time around.
and I literally, like I said, I watched it three times within a weekend, and still I was finding stuff, and I probably if I watch it today again, I'm gonna find even more.
Oh
So,
yeah. It's one of those movies that you just go back and watch and you just find something new every time.
and but that's the thing. It's like I had, I took different people to see it, and the
Mhm.
consensus was, dang, that was a boring movie.
Being working at a theater, like, you had a lot of perks of watching movies early, but I was always eager to hear audience thoughts on it. So that was one of those movies that didn't do very well money wise, and no one came to see it. So hearing a lot of people come out to see it, was a lot of older people, and
Yeah,
it was a lot of adults, and that's I thought it was great that there's people who come to see the sequel, but a lot of them were like, I didn't understand what was going on. A lot of people who came out and said like that was boring, and it's like,
but isn't that the same thing they say about this? And every time I hear someone say like, "Oh, all your favorite movies are boring movies," I'm like, "Yeah, I love boring movies." Boring movies means that they're like, especially if they're movies that have stood the test of time, like 40, 50, 60, 100 years later, we're still watching
mhm.
them. That means that there's something within this movie that is grasping people, but it's like maybe I don't know it today, but maybe in 10 years I'll know it. But it's like, just try it out. You never know what's going to happen.
The first Blade Runner also was not received very well when it was released either. Like, I mean, it did well money wise, it did decent, but it was
It
that's the reason
Yeah.
that there's 3 different cuts. That's like it just people did not receive it very well.
I have very much big crap to give them for the studio notes because I've read some of the studio notes where
Oh yeah,
they're like, oh, she's naked. Oh, like you didn't linger on that enough. The scene where
yeah,
I love one of my favorite parts is when a character goes somewhere, they're like making up some sort of like actor acting within the acting. I love that
yeah.
sort of stuff. And obviously the scene that happens in for this with Zora, obviously there's, very, scantily seen. It's actually fantastic scene. We're going to talk about it. The action is the juice.
Action
The
is the
most
juice.
juiciest scenes in this movie. Tell me what's going on. And every time I talk about action to the juice, when I say juice for anything, it means that there is a sauce there. There's something special about it. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, there's action and then that's what's happening. It could be an emotional action. It could be all sorts of different actions. And
So
this movie right
all
here,
so you mentioned the scene with Zora. That entire sequence where he's chasing her through like the streets and you have like all the neon signs and stuff like that. I think that's one of the best scenes about the whole film for a few reasons, and it's because the action is shot really well. Everything
what
is
do you think
followed
my
really
scene
well.
is?
Is it that one as well? Yeah.
Let's talk about it, man.
It's good. It's edited so well, but then also like it's almost like it jumps right into another action-packed sequence like immediately after. But then the scene where the replicant, I can't remember what his name is, but like smacks the gun out of his hand. There's a frame that drops in that, and so it's so much harder. And it's like, dude, like how did he do that? And you go back and rewind it. It's just there's a frame missing.
Yeah, Leon, when he catches up, he sees that Zora died, and then he gets mad. And he's like, "Oh, it's like," and then he asks Deckard a question and just starts pummeling the man. I
Yeah.
love that, but it's like
Yeah, and
it
then
starts
Rachel
with
shows up
her.
and it's a whole new scene. It's the action is the juice.
For me, it just goes all the way together because it is the chase of Zora, but right away it starts with Deckard. Obviously, he finds Zora in the club. The artificial snake. I love every single one of those details. I love all of
The
it.
aspect of the artificial snake is so interesting to me because, like, even something as simple as that, it's like, oh, the snakes aren't real either. Like, of course they're not. It's this world that we live in. And so I think from that scene, the artificial snake going forward is like, there is not a single moment in the rest of the movie that is at all even kind of a lull.
100%. I will say I did fall asleep watching the movie this time around because I was taking those muscle relaxers and I got about 40 minutes in. I was so like soothed by the movie, by the music, and I just fell asleep. It's like when I watch Lord of the Rings, I fall asleep when they're traveling because the Howard
Yeah.
Shore music, the shots, and I'm just like,
I tell people I fall asleep to movies like this and they think, "Oh, well, it must have been a boring movie." It's like,
no,
"No, it's a
no,
comfort movie." It is not a boring movie at all. It's just that I've watched it so many times that I just know it really well and I could go to sleep knowing that I'm going to dream the rest of the movie.
100%. And I went back and I literally watched the whole movie again and then it hit even more. But obviously, Zora gets confronted by Deckard. He gets pushed, and Deckard starts chasing her out the door. And like you said, this is the only time I think that we get a really big piece of 2019 LA, and it is the onslaught of just people. They're whirling around like little ants everywhere, right? Especially with the shots. And I think I have an issue nowadays where I'm like, they shoot a lot of action in like mediums or close up, and then they don't have
Mhm.
enough wide shots, so you have no geography of the location.
I think even Denis Villeneuve did a pretty good job when it came to, like, showing the second film, like, you see so much of the world that he lives in, like, these, like, brothels and then, like, these girls that are, like, almost like pickup girls, and there's just, like, random ads everywhere, like, Ana de Armas dancing, and it's like, this is just an insane world to be living in.
It's raining, there's so much smoke. The scale, you get to see the scale in Blade Runner,
Yeah.
in both of the movies. You see the scale of the setting itself. The first shot of the movie where we see Deckard for the first time, right? The
Mhm.
camera comes from top, and then we just come in on my man's just chilling. What's up?
Yeah. It's one of the rare instances where it feels like the world is also a character in the sense that, like, the film was made in, I think, 1982, right? 1982 it was released. So, it was going off of what they thought 2019 was going to look like, which is still super 80s. It looks like they were like, "What if we just took everything that we have in the 80s now and just amp it up a little bit?" And they just applied that to everything. And they do that with the second movie as well with, like, what technology is now and apply it to what we think the future will be like in 30 years. And so much of that is like, I think for me personally, also just so much juice. Like Tyrell's like entire lair, like it's like it just looks so insanely cool to live in this world. It looks like New York in like a really grimy, dirty way.
And I'm going to talk about it in production value because this world is fantastic. And we're going to agree very much on, I'm going to make some definitive statements. And those definitive statements are fact. It's not even an opinion, the influence that Blade Runner has when it comes to world building. And Ridley Scott is one of those great world builders. And they got very lucky that has become a new world builder with Blade Runner 2049, Dune 1, Dune 2. He's very much transformed himself into this level that Ridley's given us with this, whether it's Gladiator, Alien, all sorts of things. But the scene obviously progresses and Zora gets gunned down. And every single time a replicant is killed in this movie, it is tragic.
Mhm.
When Darryl Hannah's character, when she dies inside the guy's house at the end, she's dying and she's literally like having a seizure. It literally feels like something out of a horror movie.
Mhm.
And we see the effects it has on Deckard, right? What does he do? He gets in the little meeting with Bryant. Or no, before he gets to Bryant, he literally is like, I gotta get a bottle. Literally, it's like, okay, is that enough money for
Yeah.
this
It's like
bottle?
stressing him out. It bothers him.
And he's trying to get the bottle. Is like, oh, you gotta Gaff's like, oh, you gotta go see Bryant. And then he's like, oh, you have to kill 4 more. It's like, oh, y'all should take a lesson from this man. This man's a killer. And it's like you see what the dialogue is, but you see the visual of just how dour and how bad Deckard feels for the job that he's doing, right? And he doesn't even know that he's killing his own kind yet at that point.
I think having that in mind, like going back and rewatching it, like we said, like going back and rewatching a film like this and knowing that he's a replicant,
Replicant.
and then having him like rewatching those scenes where he kills replicants and he's realizing like he's killing his own kind, but he doesn't know it yet. It's like those are the most effective moments for me going back and watching them.
And even then, it's like right after that happens, Brian and Gaff, they disappear. And then Leon, he comes out of nowhere, right? And he's obviously beating Deckard to a pulp. I think one of the best things about like whether it's like Philip Marlowe, like film noir movies, Blade Runner, whatever it is in between, if you're a detective, especially like a PI, you're getting the crap beat out of you. Even
Yeah,
the nice guys.
you are not a good fighter. Like you're getting the sheep out of you every freaking day.
And the scene ends obviously with we're talking about Deckard killing, but it's this time around it's Rachel that does the kill. And it's like even if
Mhm.
the first time you're watching this, it's like she knows she has just killed one of her own kind in a sense. And you see obviously that gets back to the apartment and you see how frazzled she is about what happens. And the only person in this entire story that can actually empathize with her is Deckard.
Yeah, funny enough, actually, that's like one of the scenes immediately after too, where they showed like that little like reflection in his eye. So it's like almost like a nod to the audience, like, "Hey, he is
Y'all
too.
caught that? Y'all
He
know?
is too." Yeah, it's a really good emotional moment from I think both of them. I don't think that scene would fly today if they made it, just because of
Yeah,
how persistent he is. But it was a different time, also.
it is. Yeah,
Not saying it's
because
fine.
I I literally watched that scene or that little piece of the scene 6 times, 5, 6 times, and I was like, "Okay, I see their intention within this, but today, 2024, sexual assault, that's
Yeah.
what it feels like."
It was a different time, so I understand how that scene, like, maybe not have gotten the attention it
Or
did, but at the same time, like,
it's the push.
that's in a lot of movies now. Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
push.
and you understand within the narrative of why he's doing it, and he's trying to get something out of her in a sense of, like, try to make a decision that's not in your format, in your, like in the processes of your minds, actually try to be a human, and he's trying to find a reason, a meaning within his own life, within her, where so it's like there's 2 different narratives of, like,
There's a
character-wise.
reflection happening in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's they're just trying, and the reflection ends up being that they gotta, mhm. I'll chug right ahead into production value then. Super 8, yet again, production value. What is the most impressive part of this film? Whether it's a shot, moment, scene, everything feels like it's left on the screen. Nothing is on the sidelines. What is the aspect of one of the greatest movies ever made, Blade Runner, production value for you, Martin?
I think that Tyrell, like, his office, like, his whole thing with the owl, like, the giant room with just, like, this beautiful yellow, like, kind of like I don't even know how to explain it. What is this thing? Like, it's like got, like, just geometric shapes everywhere. It kinda reminds me
Yep.
of Dune. But yeah, Tyrell's lair, I guess we could call it. That entire thing, it looks like I want to hang out in there. I want to go watch the movie in there. You know what I mean?
I need 100 candles in my room when I'm sleeping.
I mean, his room looks cool too, but the
Yeah.
entire like the off like his little area with like the chairs, like the lounge area, that entire and it's like a giant window. Yeah, I love that area. It's like looking outside of LA. I think his whole office building, that entire structure, yeah, it looks kind of ugly, but it's also kind of cool.
And I think when it comes to Skynet, I don't know if you've ever been on like this the Terminator 2 ride that they have in Orlando.
Terminator 2.
Yeah, but it's like even then, the Skynet, like the structure of Skynet, or if it's Independence Day, it's very much Blade Runner esque, and that's my
Yeah.
thing. I'm going to get into, but for me, it is production value for this movie is just the entire world, the
Yeah.
entire piece of world building that Ridley and his team do with this is unlike anything that's ever been done, and it's because of the people that he had working with him.
The other one I'd say that for me, like, kinda stood out, and it was kind of a really hard one to choose between the 2, but the apartment that he has, the one that JF Sebastian has,
Yeah,
his apartment looks like a dump. It is so cool.
and you know what's funny about that? That is the Bradbury building, and they shot nights, but everything that they messed up within the building, they had to
Mhm.
clean it up and have it ready in the morning. So they're talking about how we did that was we used cork because they had water in there, right? And the cork
Mhm.
would literally just squeeze up all the water, and then they could just shovel it, dump it out, and then we'll shoot the next night. That's how they did all that stuff when it comes to
It looks
that
insane to me, like,
location.
they work with a lot of shadows as well, so
Yeah.
it's just one of those things that, like, I think lighting, especially, like, take a freaking note from this, Hollywood, dude, like, this whole movie is so dark, but you're not able to miss a single thing that you need to understand.
And when he's making the descent up into the
Mhm.
apartment itself, there's a light coming down and we see the blimp itself, right? There's a blimp with
Mhm.
the ads running on it. It's like off world. Let's get off world, or you know, the
The
ads about
gi
that, right?
that giant Coca-Cola ad with, like, the I think that was one of the first things about this movie that I saw that I did not know was from this movie that I was like, "That looks so cool. I don't even
Oh,
know
okay.
what that is, and I wanna see it." So, like, that's another one that I'd say, like, just maybe the entire world, I guess. Like, it's so cool to just watch this movie, just to live in it.
And when Ridley was talking about this movie with John Favreau, they had screened the movie at the DGA theater in LA. They had redone the theater, and one of the movies that they had as like christening the theater was Blade Runner Final Cut in 4K. You know, like literally the best copy that you
Mhm.
could watch the movie in a brand new theater. And when he was talking about it, he's like, yeah, I got Jordan Cronenworth. I thought he's the best, cameraman I can really find for this. And the team that he brought with him was Charles Snow, Michael Kaplan, Larry Paul, and then along. So that's costumes. Larry Kaplan, another guy. He's worked on Star Wars among many other things. Larry Paul was the production designer, and it was pretty much Sid Mead. Sid Mead, he was very much, a futurist. He used to literally talking about. He's like, yeah, the man literally just goes to like the Danish lands and just draws up sobs, and that's gonna be my job. He does that, and then he also came and worked on Blade Runner. And listen to this. So the whole scene we were just talking about, the chase with Zora outside.
Mhm.
So that is the backlot at one of the studios in LA. And what they did was they literally just stood there, took pictures, right? They blew up the pictures and just put it on a wall. And then Sid Mead took gouache painting and literally just started painting over it. And that's how they got the set. That's how they started making the set, like the
That's
design
insane.
for the set. And really,
I
he's
believe it.
like,
I mean, I feel
go on.
like for every movie that I find, like, the coolest stuff for, it's always like, "Oh, well, we did that at the last minute." Like, someone just painted over it. Like, it's always, like, the most insane, and then someone's always like, "We spent $1,000,000 on that backdrop right there." It's like, "It
No,
looks
no,
like
but I'm
crap,
talking
just
about
so you know."
not even that, not even a backdrop, like literally like to design it, he just started
Oh, yeah,
drawing
yeah, yeah.
over the photos just to make the design. And there's little details like from the one of the movies, I think it's the musical that Francis Ford Coppola. I think it's like One from the Heart from Francis Ford
One from
Coppola.
the
They had a
heart,
bunch
yeah.
of neon signs. They even stole those signs to like put it in the movie. And even John Favreau was like, yeah, like Roger Corman did that. But what you do in this movie, it feels like every single thing that's in the movie feels like it is for this movie.
It doesn't feel like anything is borrowed. I mean,
No.
that's I feel like, unfortunately, you get that with a lot of movies now. It's like, "Oh, well, this is like a derivative of this movie. This is" oh, if it it's so strange to watch a movie and tell people Like, it is the only thing like itself like it has ever been. So whenever I explain like anything to Dune to people, they're like, "Why is the book so hard to read?" And I'm like, "Well, the biggest thing with Dune is that they didn't have words for what they were like, trying to express. So there's very dense descriptions of just everything. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's what you get with this movie."
And he was talking about it. He's like, okay, you've heard Ridley talk, right? If no one has ever heard Ridley Scott talk, please go to like YouTube, podcast, whatever. Listen to the man talk. He's this old British man, very much set in his ways, but the man knows exactly what he's doing every step of the way. And he's talking about this wet, smoke, and night. Those are the three elements that I knew I could use this on a limited budget, and I can make everything look better. Okay.
Mhm.
So there's points in this movie where, okay, within 8 hours, how many setups do you think that Ridley Scott got when he was shooting this movie? Eight
In 8
hours.
hours?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure probably, like, plenty of them. I mean, it's
One,
weird to think
one, one
for, like, a camera shot?
for a shot for one setup. He got one.
Jesus.
It took 8 hours.
For
And
which
or
just any
just it
shot?
was the script supervisor that was talking about it, and she was like, "We it wasn't one shot, it was multiple shots where this happened, especially like I guess the exterior shots where they're like on the back lot." And she
Mhm.
was saying like we take all this time just for one shot, and then you'd go back and watch the shot like on the dailies and be like, "No way, we really did that." And
Yeah.
even back then, they were really getting blown away by what they did. And Jordan Cronenworth, just for this one movie, is one of the greatest cinematographers of all time. This is one of the best looking movies, production value wise, I've ever seen. I don't know where's this tip for you? I think it's one of mine.
Oh, production value, this is insane. I'd say that, like, this is top 10 for me. Like, there's not a lot of movies out there that are able to do what this film did, have it look as good as it did, let alone in the '80s.
There's so much like environmentally motivated lighting. And it's like, oh yeah, did y'all forget that this is how you're supposed to light sets? Like what happened to Gordon Willis sort of, lighting sets where it's like we go from the dark and I'm gonna light it up from here. There's different approaches to cinematography, and this is one of the ones that I really love. And you know what stood out to me of all the things? Like this movie looks gorgeous, but you know what stood out to me during this rewatch? It's a scene where J.F. Sebastian and the guy, I don't know how we've gone almost an hour not talking about Roy Batty, but it's literally the moment where they get to Tyrell's room, and
Oh, yeah,
Tyrell
yeah, yeah.
turns around and he turns on a light or something at his when he's like at his chessboard, and the light just pops up. He turns around and the light pops up, and I'm like, oh, this is genius. That little shot,
And
that's what blows my mind.
it's little things like that you don't notice the first time, and then you watch it again, you're like, "How the hell did they do that?" Like, that's insane.
And obviously that whole scene, the candle lighting, like none of it just style out of it's just fantastic. It's like we used to I'd say we used to. I think there's still movies that are
We used
doing
to make
fantastic
proper
lighting
movies. We used to make proper movies, you can say
because
it.
this is a $32 million budget, right? Inflated today, it's a $99 million budget. I don't know if they give.
Yeah, there's not a single movie that today that could do something like that with a $99 million
But
budget.
that being said, he spent 170 million on Blade Runner for 2049. The scale is so much bigger, and the work is so warranted there.
Yeah. It's unfortunate they just didn't make the money back, but that's one of those movies I think, again, like, just like the first one, it's kinda started to get a following online. Like, a lot of people have kinda started to use it for memes, like, TikTok has hit the circuit of, like, the I can fix that," or something like that.
Yes.
So, when I was, like, 19 or 20, or actually it was, like, 21 or 22, it was, like, right after COVID hit, but I was hanging out at my apartment, and we were friends with a couple of dudes that lived upstairs, and they were, like, talking to us, and keep in mind for the story, these are like a bunch of frat dudes. Like, they aren't guys that are going out of their way to watch like avant-garde cinema in any way, shape, or form, but they knew that I liked movies. And so they were like,
Yeah.
"Yo, have you seen this movie? I can't remember what it's called." And I was like, "Well, what's it about?" They're like, "It's about this robot." And I was like, "Okay." And they're like, they kept explaining the movie, and I was like, "Are you talking about Blade Runner 2049?" They were like, "Yes." And they were like insanely in love with it. They were like, "That is gas." And they were talking about how like insane it is. And then they kept talking about the rest of it. Yeah, yeah. I'm pretty sure that we were all we
They
were
were
having a good
zooted.
time. But we were all talking about it, and the other friends within the group were like, "This is a good movie," and the other one was like, "Yeah, like it doesn't make much sense, but you just gotta enjoy it." And I was like, I mean, it makes sense. You just gotta pay attention. But that's like That's what I mean. Like the film has gained something of like a following, even though it didn't do well in theaters.
The legacy of both of these movies is fantastic. And before we jump off of production value, you're going to have to humor me for a second because I literally wrote a list of random details that I really loved, like production value wise, where it's like this world, the scale is just out of anything that I've ever seen. This is the movie that gets ripped off the most. Literally, we're talking about Avatar, right? Have you seen the opening of
Mhm.
Avatar, like the extended opening? I don't know if you've seen
Oh
it.
yeah.
It
It
is
looks just
literally
like this. It
it's
looks. I was literally watching it the other night. Yeah, like it's. I
Total
was saying, I was
Recall.
like, this is Blade Runner.
Any sort of movie, if you're talking about a futurist theme, that's supposed to be like grounded in like what maybe the future looks like. Blade Runner has influence on it.
You know
Literally,
what's crazy though? If somebody took a screenshot of the first 10 minutes of Avatar, that opening scene with like that cyberpunk noir kind of look to it, and they said this is the first look at Blade Runner 3, I'd be like, fuck yeah. I'd be like, this is my shit right here. Like I would be
Sam
so into
Worthington.
it
I
to
don't
the
know
point.
about that.
I like him in Avatar, but maybe it's just
Jake
because you don't
Sully,
see his
yeah,
face very often. Jake
yeah, that's
Sully.
true. But okay, let me run through these details. All the fake animals, the owls, the snakes, the fact that we don't see any piece of greenery pretty much the entire movie, right? It is
Hmm.
just barren of greenery. Obviously, we talk about the rain. It's the little things like the hair dryer that Zora has in her dressing room.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I need that in my life. But it's the lights on the umbrellas. You know, they pretty much just
Oh
like
yeah.
jerry rig like tube lights onto umbrellas. Like, why are you doing this? Or it's the noodle bar at the beginning, right? He's at a noodle
Yeah.
bar. And it's like, wait, we kind of have these places. We actually do have
We
these
kind of have
places
them
now, right?
now. Like it's
But we didn't
strange. Like
back then.
they kind of in a way did predict a lot of the future in a very different way. Like they predicted it in the way that they thought the 80s would look in a more enhanced way.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, a lot of what they show in this movie did kind of become true. Not like the, I guess you could say like the
No flying
artificial
cars.
animals or anything like that. No flying cars, but
Not
we're
yet, at
getting
least.
there. Yeah, Elon
Sadly.
Musk will get us a few there.
Actually, do you want to hear Ridley's thoughts on that? He was talking to John Favreau, and he's like, and obviously when people come to make these movies, they've got their own opinions about everything, and he's talking about just overall the thoughts about like apart. He says the word apartheid specifically when it comes to the elements of how the replicants are treated and how it's like people are being treated in a inhumane way where we're same humans but you're treating me a different way, you're dehumanizing me, right? He's talking about that, but he's like, oh, that's going to happen. I think it's already happening to some extent. But I don't even believe in driverless cars, by the way. I think it's ridiculous. And then he kind of goes on to rant about like Prometheus and Alien, how he's like, I've been talking about AI and all this stuff for quite some time. This is an interview from like like I think it's 4 or 5 years ago at this point.
Hmm.
But like even then, he's talking about it's like, obviously an Alien, Ash. He's the one who's on the boat. He's on the
Oh
ship,
yeah.
and he's very much the emotionalist company man that's trying to keep everything afloat, and he's the android in that story. And there's a whole thing about AI and how it's a different take, but there's things going on.
Yeah. He's tackled
The-
the same subject matter a few times now. It's interesting to think about.
and he's tackled it on different like approaches in a sense, because he talks about within one paragraph of just talking, he goes from Blade Runner to Alien, and then he goes to Fassbender and Prometheus.
Hmm.
And he was trying to make another movie after Alien Covenant that was very much trying to deal with that sort of thing again. So it's something where Ridley has very much been thinking about this for some time. And I think he might be a very almost brutish man, but he thinks about humanity a lot, even at the age that he's at.
I think he's had a lot of time to think about it, is the thing. You're saying like he's got a lot of different approaches and different avenues he's explored, but it's almost like he kind of does trade-offs with what their motivations are. Like what the sense of humanity is in all of them, like empathetic or
Nothing.
like are they going to try to take over for everything? And that's interesting to think about. Like, yeah, I like Ridley Scott's work for that specific reason.
Let's get into dialogues. And dialogues, I mean, this movie, like we've been talking about, it's not necessarily always the plot itself, but I think this movie has fantastic dialogue. What pieces of dialogue for you stood out in any way, affected you emotionally, or you just love that piece of dialogue? What's up for it for Blade Runner, Martin?
I think you probably might have the same answer just considering how gas this line is. But the Tears in the Rain monologue, dude. The Tears in the Rain monologue is so beautiful. I could listen to that and just be like, okay, there's my day. Like that's it. Like
I've
that's
seen
it's such a
things you people wouldn't believe.
And that's what's crazy is that he says that out of context, and it's like, you don't have to elaborate. That's fine. Just leave it there. That is such a good line that you do not have to add on to. And it's the fact that he's able to just go from that to memories to tears in the rain. It's like, that's such a good analogy. Also, the Rachel line where she says, is this test supposed to test if I'm a lesbian or a replicant, doctor?
Oh, actually, from that scene, one of my favorite lines is how Deckard says, "How can it not know?" And we see what Deckard's postulation is just subconsciously when he's talking to Darryl. That is like it. He doesn't even classify her as like a her. It's just how does it not know? And it's a
Yeah.
throwaway line, but it packs that punch.
It's almost insulting. Like he doesn't realize how insulting it sounds until, and maybe this is after he's learned he's a replicant, but
Yeah.
how insulting it sounds to just say that something isn't it.
Yeah. And we by no means say that Deckard is a good human or a good, even just good being. I think he's a very flawed one that's trying to find his way. And obviously, we
Mhm.
see things that he does that none of us necessarily agree with, but we also see the other side of like how his job is literally killing people and then trying to cope with it. And now
Mhm.
he's trying to get out of the rut of that as he's having an existential crisis, essentially.
I think that's a lot of what you see with Kay in the second one too, is when he's doing like his like calibration, like the cells interlinked, is kind of like making sure, hey,
Interlinked.
we want to make sure that you're not showing empathy. We want to make sure you're not a human.
And that goes right into one of my lines. Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is
Oh
to be
yeah,
a
that's a
slave.
that's a cold ass line, bro. That's whenever
Yeah, when
I
Leon
know what you're
comes
talking about.
and smacks the crap out of him, or he wait, actually, Leon asks him, "How old am I?" That's what he asks him first, right? Before he starts smacking him around, he's like, "Oh, you need to do you like how old am I?" Still, like he wants to know to some extent, or
Yeah,
maybe Leon's just being funny. Who knows?
Edward
I, get-
James
I
Olmos' line towards the end of it when he's like, "It's too bad she won't live." Like I used to say that on,
yes,
like I used to say that
yes.
all the time just for no reason.
No, no, no. But the best part of it is, too bad she won't live. Then again, who
Who
does?
does? Yeah. God damn,
And
bro. That's cold.
I do want to circle back to the part where it's like that is what it is to be a slave, to live in fear, right? Even today, if you drop that into any context outside in the
Oh
world right
yeah.
now, it is all about dividing people and instilling fear. If they're fearful of another group of people, then we're not united to some extent. And that's how,
It's kind of
you
what's
know,
happening right now.
and it's not just now, it keeps happening, it's going to happen even worse. And I'm not this is not even a political thing because it does, it very much falls into politics now, but it's a thing. And you think about it, whether it's like the crusades, go back that far, right? People are like, oh no, that's not my land, that's your land. And instead, when it's always men, where it's like, oh, your life is not more valuable than mine. Oh, I have a sword, let me kill you for this. Like, literally, what matters more? Is this the human life or is this piece of land? But it's like that little line, man. It always like ruminates in my mind. In the same context, remember what Tyrell says? Their motto: "More human than human" is our motto.
Human than human. That's such a cold.
And
Like the
but
line
isn't that the truth? That ends up being the truth, right? For the
that ends up being
story.
like the entire story is it's characters who end up being more human than the people who are supposed to have the empathy. It's crazy to me. Like it's so much about just talking about the film is just like peeling back layers and layers.
And for me, it's like I know this is very much a thing where it's like it's a bunch of white men making this story. Like if it was people of color that made this story, it might have not been necessarily a sci-fi movie. It could have been, but there would have been just the same level of storytelling, but it would have just been in the context of what actually happens to people of color, especially at this time. Like I said,
Mhm.
Ridley, he mentioned the word specifically apartheid, right? And obviously that's what was going on in South Africa at the time. And the persecution that happened within that whole situation is just something else. I'm
I've
surprised
been
people don't talk about it enough.
been rewatching the Planet of the Apes movies, and funny enough, like that's a movie I'd say like going back and watching it as an adult, like I had to grow up and experience something a little bit. But entire first, I guess you could say like 5 movies, you go back and watch them, and it's like, dude, there
And
is so much being
you're
said.
talking about the OG movies, just to
Yeah.
clarify for anybody.
We're talking about Planet of the Apes. We're talking about Beneath the Planet of the Apes, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, Conquest for
Charlton
the Planet of
Heston,
the
the
Apes.
goat. Charlton Heston, man.
Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which was fine, but they all have like the same basic concept and the same basic ideas, and that's what I loved about them is that they are so much about humanity being like saying stuff about humanity within the lens of like, oh well, this is a movie about monkeys taking over the earth.
And you, when you hear my companion movies, you're gonna be like, oh, okay. Vikash, and this is before the whole thing that happened. Right now, when we're recording this, it's May 11th, and Twitter is having a field day right before the opening of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes when it comes to all the Apes movies, especially the Matt Reeves ones, Dawn and War for the Planet of the Apes. And I didn't, me, I sit in my room, I watch a movie, and then I'm like, oh, this is one of the, one of my favorite things I've ever seen. This is something like of a Greek tragedy, but it's these apes, and how am I so invested in these CGI apes? And that blew my mind in the first place when I watched this a decade ago. But then there's so many. I just love to see the culture built, like, it's vindication. That's what it is. That's literally the word I
There's
typed in today on
there
Twitter. I was
is
like,
a
vindication.
monkey like revolution happening right now, bro. I have
Harambe,
my
Harambe.
Harambe would love these movies. Yeah.
Yes,
No,
sir.
I had a tweet go viral about Bad Ape. Like,
Bad ape. Steve Zahn. Okay, sorry, we're not gonna get into this. We're not gonna get.
I lived here in this zoo.
But it's like there's a point. I think if I rewatch War of the Planet of the Apes, I'm gonna cry when I watch that. Like when that
Dude,
scene,
it's so good. I
he's
love I
in,
love Steve Zahn.
and oh man, and it's like I get goosebumps just even thinking about it because that's a human performance. Yes, there's CGI, but the humanity that comes through, whether it's Andy Serkis, whether it's Steve Zahn, it's fantastic, and that's what all sci-fi, I said they pose questions, right? But there's also a thing of like production value of like, okay, we're gonna get into, a different planet, maybe we're gonna get into the apes, we're gonna get into replicants, but it's all gonna round back to the world that we are living in. And whether you see the correlations or not, that's on you. But we have left you every single little Hansel and Gretel little breadcrumbs for you to follow the path. But there's not going to be any witch. You're just going to have, an intense, relationship with a movie.
I think it's up to
And
the audience as well to kind of decide whether or not to accept that piece of work for what it is. Because it's easy to kind of say, and I know you said it before in the last episode with Marley with the Tokyo Drift episode, like media literacy is dead.
yeah.
But I mean, it's
Oh,
kind of true. Like it's
I didn't say
unfortunate to say, but
I wouldn't say it's dead, but it's a thing where it's like I think there's enough people in this world that have it, but it just means that we always have to keep talking about it. And for me, like obviously I don't sit here and I say it multiple times during this pod where it's like I don't sit here and intellectualize the movies that I love, even Blade Runner. But if I sit here and think about it, this is what comes out of it. You haven't heard the
mhm.
Mad Max episode yet. That's going to drop within 2 days. And even then, I'm excited for you to hear that conversation because you're gonna be like, oh, this very much falls in line with the themes of even Blade Runner, where it's like necessarily you don't see these things when you're watching it, but like, oh, all these details are very much there, and people need to talk about this stuff. I love these movies. All not I wouldn't say almost at face value, but it's like even those ideas just existing within. Maybe I don't like pick it up this time, but maybe next time I pick it up, maybe someone else picks it up and teaches me about it, right?
I think it's also a decision though. Like you have to
Oh,
decide whether
100%.
or not you want to go out of your way to understand if a film is trying to say something. Like if a film and maybe it's just the Oklahoma in me, but I knew plenty of people growing up that like if they didn't understand a movie, they'd be like, that was dumb. Like I didn't understand that. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, if you don't understand it, maybe make an effort to try and understand it instead of just writing it off as a bad movie or writing it off as a dumb movie. But living in Atlanta now, I meet a lot more people who will like, I'll mention a movie that maybe was perceived as dumb where I came from. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, you actually like this movie for a few different reasons than I do, which is cool.
100%. And I will drop one last line before we get off of dialogues. Nothing is worse than having an itch that you cannot scratch.
Oh, yeah.
And think of
That's
that applies to everybody's life.
that's one of those lines that I feel like I've heard it so many times before, and I feel like I don't know if it came from this movie first or if it was just like a really relevant line.
You know what I always say? I think it's with any human where it's like if I heard it here first, then that's what it is. Where it's like, okay, I heard it from Blade Runner. That seems to be the oldest thing I saw it in.
That's
Then I'm
what
just
I
gonna
think
assume.
though as well, but then I'm also like, that's such a simple line. It couldn't have could just come from that. Like,
But that's the thing about dialogues. We're ending dialogues right now, but my favorite the thing is the English language, any language is finite, right? But the way in which you put these words together, the way you frame it, the sentence structure, whatever it is, the way you do it creates something.
Like it
The
creates a
thing I
memory for you,
write,
like to remember. Oh, that's from Blade Runner, even though I've heard it 1,000 times before.
or it's like for me, I always go back to the Dark Knight. It's like you either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain.
There's different variations of that have been said, but
Oh,
that's
Jay Z,
specifically.
yeah,
Oh, he said it before.
yeah. He has, I think it's like a song from like '99 or something, where it's like he has almost the same line, and I'm just like, was
Oh,
Nolan
so it's
listening
like
to Jay Z?
that's what I mean though. Is that like yeah, that idea may have been implanted in the '90s, but it's like no one remembered it until Batman or Harvey Dent said it. Yeah, I get what you're
For
saying
me,
for sure.
my problem is sometimes it'll be like colloquialisms. There's one that of all references Shrek uses at a in a something. He says "smooth move X-lax," and I always thought I was like, that's the first time I
Smooth
heard
move,
it.
X-Lax.
I heard it from Shrek, and then I was like, oh, that's a line from Shrek, right? And then in high school, I'm sitting in my economics class, like one of my favorite teachers, Mr. Lina, and he says "smooth move X-lax," right? And he's just one of the guys, and I'm just like, you really like Shrek, don't you? He's like, what do you mean? I was like, "Smooth Move X-Lax. That's from Shrek, right?" He's like, "No, it's been a phrase that I've been using since I was like 10." I was like, "Dang!" I
Oh, so
looked
that's
so
just a
stupid
common. That's just a common like line then.
because
That's
for me,
funny.
that's what happens to me because I don't, I didn't grow up around a bunch of Americans for the most part. I didn't grow up around a lot of people,
Yeah.
growing up,
I
but that's why it's like I'm still learning. And I'm always willing to learn, but sometimes I'll hear stuff. I'm like, I don't know about that. Why is that a phrase? I'm gonna drop into the Layla. So there's no needle drops in this movie, but the best use of score. I think there's only one answer to give here.
feel like it's the opening scene, like the look of Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
What were you thinking?
I was thinking Tears of Rain.
Okay, I mean that too, but like, hear me out. Hear me out. Hear me out. Okay,
No, no, you're right. You're right.
that opening scene when you hear that, like that, just like synth, like you don't hear
Yeah.
that with a movie
No,
ever.
but it's like between that and then it cuts to the all seeing, like the omniscient eye, essentially.
Hmm.
And then we cut back to, we see 2019, right? And the fires are coming out of the buildings. And it's just,
That sets
one of
it
the,
sets the world for everything. It's impossible to like whenever I show anybody that movie specifically, it's like that moment forward, it's like you are going to pay attention. You are not this has your attention now. Like it's the only other movie I could think of that can pull this off as well as this did is the second one. That is it.
I'm going to give you an interesting one. The opening of Roma, where it's just the shot of like the water getting
The
washed as
plane.
she's cleaning, and there's the plane comes by, but it's just, you're just hearing, I don't know if you watched the movie with headphones, but like the sound mix on that movie is fantastic. They
Mhm.
literally did, the Dolby Atmos 112 channels, and then they put that movie on Netflix. What the hell? Yeah,
I have
that's
the
that.
Blu-ray for
it
it, so I have
it literally, it feels like the water's washing over you, breathing in and out. There's no music, if I
yeah.
remember correctly, but it's just that sound, that diegetic sound. And then you get pulled into the movie. I don't know what it is, but it's almost like, oh, if you were living your entire day and then now you're gonna have to focus on this. Alfonso is almost like, okay, narrow it down, narrow it down. You're gonna be here with me now. Okay, stay with me. Okay, this is the story, and that's what good directors do, right? They make these moments, and Alfonso is a world builder himself.
I think so. Like I mean, Y tu mamá también is like a great example of one that's I mean, everyone's kind of giving challengers a lot of great hype right now, which is really cool
Y
to
tu mamá
see.
también. I haven't even seen
But
Challengers, but Y tu mamá también.
Y tu mamá también, I think, is just a much better version of that, like, same type of story, and it's a very different story, on paper. It is a very different type of energy. Challengers is so high energy, there's so much happening all the time, like, it's almost an energetic movie. I had the score downloaded on my phone for when I go to the gym, you know what I mean? Like, it's such a
Yeah,
different movie, like, I'm not gonna listen to the Y tu mamá también's music while I'm at the gym, like, it's the
but
same type of
there's
story,
a
but they're
soul
so
within that movie, though.
yes,
That
yes,
is just, it's
absolutely.
moving. Like
But yeah,
like
Alfonso, like even the Harry Potter movie that he did, it just feels like you could watch that alone and it
my
works by
favorite one,
itself.
man. I've literally seen it 20 plus times, and just growing up, I had the DVD, so that happens. But it's like that was one. Even today, it's still my favorite movie. It's just every time I come back to it, there's little details that he pushes in. He's like, "Oh, why are these kids wearing these robes? Can we put them in actual clothes? Can we do this? Let's make this a little bit darker. Let's make this a little more horror." he starts adding in actual elements, right? And
Hmm.
they are, I'm going to get off this tangent in a second, but they were talking about how Del Toro was one of the guys that they pushed around for the first movie, right? And think about like the elements he would have brought himself if he had
Oh
gotten
yeah,
to that
yeah.
story first.
Del
Not
Toro
they
is such an interesting person because he's one of those guys that's just almost done so many movies. Like he almost did the Hobbit movies, and then Peter Jackson ended up doing them, and then he almost did like Blade 3, and then someone else did it completely. Like it's
David S. Goyer.
yeah, and then he almost did Pacific Rim 2, and then he
But
didn't.
every
Which
single time, it's him not trying to compromise his artistic vision. And even Peter talks about how it's like every single thing that Guillermo had done was fantastic. And then I just got essentially just slapped with, I just kind of have to get this going without getting the time that Guillermo got. That's what
mhm,
happened. That's why those movies are not anywhere close to the level of
yeah.
genius that Lord of the Rings are at.
I think it was partly the studio's fault as well. Like they were pressuring someone to do something quick, and that's just
100%.
not how those two people worked. Yeah. I mean,
100% studio.
actually, funny enough, we got a new announcement for what was it? The
Yeah.
Hunt for Gollum.
Yeah.
It's
I,
another like
I,
I was actually gonna I was actually planning on doing a video on it like recently, but I was like, what is there to say about this dude? Like there's so many of these happening, it just don't need to work.
that's why like when it comes to movie news, I like once in a while I'll chime in. Besides that, I don't really feel the need to say anything besides like, okay, I've got 2 cents to give. I'm going to give my 2 cents and I'm out of here. I'm not like, news is news, right? Especially after the strikes, even more sobering to where it's like they're just pushing all this stuff out when they need to and make these narratives, but they're not actually helping people who are actually in these jobs when it actually counts, even if you're a
Yeah.
director. And like I said, when you listen to us talk about George Miller, I bring it back to even like Damien Chazelle and the situation he was going through. I mean, after
George
we
Miller
shot it,
almost doing a Justice League movie too. That's insane. Like the guy.
I name drop a couple people for Justice League because two of the people that are in Mad Max were supposed to be in his Justice League.
Mhm. Army Hammer was supposed to be Batman, I think.
Yep.
Every time I think about George Miller, I'm like, why the hell didn't he get to do his Justice League movie, man? Like, just sucks. Like,
Oh,
he is
do you
such an
know the
insane
whole story
director.
about Contact?
Oh yeah, the whole
Yeah,
thing with him. Yeah,
with Bob Zemeckis. Just yeah, I literally cut a thing together. I was I'm gonna
there's
bring
so
it back
much
to Blade
to
Runner.
think about, like movies that almost happened. But yeah, those are very good pieces of
They
like
just need
lore. I guess you could
they
think
need people to
of.
be bold like they were with this movie with Blade Runner. I will say that. And you said the opening is fantastic, but it is Tears of Rain because it's like depending on the movie that you have, it's like the emotional moment, like the catharsis of the movie
Mhm.
itself. It comes at different points during the movie. For this
Yeah,
one, it is very much the last 10 minutes of the movie. Everybody has literally gone to every single extent to talk about and intellectualize Tears of Rain. I don't really need to do that. But for me, my own personal effect of when it comes to Layla, since 2017, literally, if you call me right now, it's gonna be Tears of Rain. I've for years and years and years, I was ever since I got a phone in like 2013, I have different ringtones or text tones and things like that. But I think besides like Blade Runner is the only one where I'm like, oh, I hear this. I don't hate my ringtone. I respect it, and it brings me really good memories about that scene and just Vangelis himself and the craft it is to just have this synth score, but it's also soulful and it's almost jazzy at the same time. Very much film noir, in my
yeah.
opinion. Very much that sort of like music or neo noir. Honestly, that's what the proper term should be. But it's like Tears of Rain. It literally lives with me every single day. That being said, Martin, you know who should have been in this movie? Come on, let's recast a role for Blade Runner. Who would you put in Blade Runner? Whether it's then, now, anything in between. Is you got any
Ryan
recast for this movie?
Gosling. I would say if anybody I would recast, I think, and I thought about this one a lot. Oscar Isaac, or and
Oh,
this is kind of hard, but
yes.
because he's such a thick accent, but Javier Bardem as well.
Adam Driver also came up a little bit, but I love Oscar Isaac was on my list too, and Javier. I don't think I don't know if I told you that I keep talking about Denis Villeneuve and Steven Spielberg talking all that DGA thing. Spielberg was like, first thing I did was I wrote a letter to Denis. Second one I wrote to Javier Bardem. Stilgar was that fantastic in my opinion. I loved him in that movie. It's one of my favorite performances this year. I don't know. I
Yeah, he
don't
was
really
great.
care what the Oscars say, but like, come on, Javier Bardem. Every time he shows up, he
He's like one of my favorite actors, and
same.
Anything that he's in, I will absolutely watch it. So, like, I went to go see The Little Mermaid, and I was like, "What is?" I was like, "What's going on? What are they doing to my boy?
Look at what they did to my boy.
Look what
They
they did to my
slaughtered.
boy! They slaughtered him!" Yeah, I couldn't believe that he was in that movie. I mean, get that check, I guess, boy. But yeah, I think Javier Bardem's an incredible actor. I was really, I remember thinking Oscar Isaac was like the only one that I was like, he is the only person I could imagine as Deckard.
And for me, I think it was 2016 or maybe 2015 where there was rumblings of like, oh, Denny is gonna make he's gonna make Blade Runner, right?
Mhm.
And then I was like, okay, it has to be Ryan Gosling. I was like, Denny is literally the perfect director, even more so than Ridley today to make this movie. And then I was like, okay, it has to be Ryan. And I was like, it's probably not going to be whatever. It doesn't really matter. And then it became Ryan. I was like, okay, that's awesome, right? And I'm like, they better get Roger. Roger has to come back and shoot that movie, right? I don't know if he's going to do a sequel. And then he came back and did the movie and finally won his
Oh,
Oscar, right?
I don't know if I've shown you the I have a Blade Runner poster signed by
Yes, you
Roger
told me.
Deakins.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah,
yes.
he
You
I have a
showed you
book
showed
signed
it
by
to
him right
me.
here too. Hold on. We got a little
Byways.
book, Byways by Roger Deakins,
If any
signed.
by James and Roger, right?
Yeah, yeah. They're incredible to me, by the way. Just
That's awesome.
incredible people.
Because I think out of any podcast, I think I've listened to theirs the most. It's like that, and then like DGA. Like I like to hear creatives talk about their work, and I'm sitting here talking about the creatives' work right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but that all that being said, for me, when it came to Deckard, do you know Christopher Abbott? I said Christopher
Yes,
Abbott might be
yes,
my
yes, yes.
Deckard,
Oh my god, I didn't even think of him. He's incredible.
right? And have you seen It Comes at Night?
Yes, yes, he's really
Okay,
good in that. I
that's
actually
the first
like
thing I saw him in.
so it comes at night. He was in Poor Things recently. I
Yes,
really
sir.
liked him a lot in Sanctuary, which I don't think a lot of people did see, unfortunately. But yeah, just incredible actor.
He was in
I
like Catch 22 and some other stuff. He made Black Bear with Aubrey Plaza. He's very
yeah,
much choosing good work, in my opinion. I think he's choosing good projects, and at some point, he's gonna, he's gonna push up and like maybe do not necessarily some IP movie, but he's gonna do some studio work.
I hope that he does a big studio movie soon, but not like an IP project of any sort. Like something like, I guess you could say something that kind of falls within the range of like Challengers. That's like an original movie or
Yeah,
something along those lines that he can kind of work with like an auteur director of some sort. So yeah,
like
Christopher
I
Abbott,
would
like he
say,
already has such a good career. He's worked with David
I don't want to
Cronenberg as
will
well,
this
or
into
no, Brandon
existence,
Cronenberg.
but I don't want him to be in Batman, like the second Batman movie. But if he
Mhm.
really, really had to be in the hands of like some director at that level, if it was like a Denny, a Matt Reeves, Christopher Nolan, someone someone who gets that sort of budget nowadays, I don't want him to be a Lion Witch of the Wardrobe. But if he's in the hands of Greta, I'm there.
I need him to be
She
the
already has.
fawn. Get him as the fawn right now.
I'm thinking, processing it. I'm like, yes, he would act like
Get
because it was
get him
James McAvoy before,
get
right?
her on the phone. Email her, whatever you have to do. We'll get him.
I don't know. Christopher Abbott. I hope he has a great career coming because like I said, once I see a good actor, like I watched The Witch in like 2016, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, Anya Taylor Joy, Ralph
She blew
Ineson,
up immediately after that. Oh,
the
he's playing
woman that
Galactus
plays,
now.
yeah, the woman that plays the mother, fantastic actress too. But Ralph
She's in
Ineson,
Game of Thrones as well.
like I saw her in, I saw her in a bunch of stuff. It's like I don't know. For me, it's like it goes into my Rolodex in my head where it's like, oh, I saw that actor. Now I know who
I've
you
seen
are.
you, I've seen you, I've seen you.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I get
and
what you
it
mean. Yeah,
could
I'm the
be
same way.
anything from like The Rookie on ABC. There's a guy
Mhm.
called Michael Beach, fantastic actor, and it's like, yeah, he gets relegated to doing sort of stuff like that, but even then, he's acting so well. It's like they do not deserve to have you even on this set. He played the dad in If Bill Street Could Talk, if you remember that.
Yes, Barry Jenkins did that, I think.
Yeah, yeah, he plays
Yeah,
the
yeah.
dad of the girl that's like having the baby.
Mhm.
Love that movie too, but
No one
casting,
saw it, unfortunately. It's a good movie.
bro. When I went to the theater, I saw it. It was Kiki Lane that was the girl that was pregnant, but fantastic in that movie too. She did the old guard for Netflix under her pack. She should be doing. She deserves to have other people coming to her and asking her to be in their
Mhm.
movies. But Vic Mahoney, they actually have a woman of color directing that movie, the next one also. But whatever. That's like I'm excited for those things. But Rachel in this movie, did you have anybody for Rachel that you had thought
That's
of?
That was tough for me because I don't think there's anyone who could really embody the role of Rachel as well as she did, which is interesting to think about because, like, if you look at her filmography now, like, she doesn't really do much like face acting. She does a lot of voice acting.
Okay. I was like, for obviously, I said Oscar Isaac, and I was like, oh, Rebecca Ferguson, but obviously, at a younger, I wouldn't say in a
I
younger age, but
thought I
in
thought
a
of
different
Eva
time.
Green actually.
Eva Green, same thing. Very like, they both
It's
have
like very
this.
striking
They have
features, is what it is.
striking features, but they also have this eminence from them, where it's like,
Yeah, like they like radiate this specific
yeah.
type of energy that's like you can't get that anywhere else. Like it's you have to see it from them.
But for me, it's like when it comes to Rachel, I thought of her name is Amy Lou Wood. Have you seen Sex
Yeah.
Education?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yes, I know exactly who
So
you're talking about.
she in that show, she very much emanates that innocence, even going
Mhm,
through like the worst things possible. I don't want to say the words, but like some traumatic things happen to her in that show, and even then she has this level of like inner within her acting where she can be very innocent, but she can also delve into like very serious topics at the same time, and they play it for comedy in that, but the line between comedy and the very serious drama is not that far.
mhm.
She could totally do it. And she's probably a little bit younger. She's probably like my age, but you know, it could work. She's definitely someone I thought of that's on the younger end that could very much play that role. But then again, in Blade Runner, that's what happens, right? Deckard is a little bit older, and
Mhm.
then
He's
Sean Young, real life Rachel, very much younger, very innocent individual, and it sounds very creepy the way I'm framing it, but I very much mean it like endearingly.
it was a different time as well. Like I think that's one of those things where you hear people like my age say like, "Oh, well, my dad's 10 years older than my mom." And it's like that's true.
Soapbox takes. Give me your soapbox take. Say it now or forever hold your peace. Get up on your soapbox. I want to hear it, Martin.
I think Blade Runner 2049 is a slightly better movie, but I like the first one more.
I think I can agree on that. I can agree on that. Like I said, I think there's very much a latitude between both movies where it's like, if you're going to ask me to compare one to the other, like fully, yeah, there's certain things I can, but I don't want to because I feel like the translation, like what they've done with the movies, is it very much feels like they're from the same fiber. It doesn't feel like
I
there's a
I feel
disconnect.
like they are the exact same movie if you really look at them side by side, and the only real difference is that we have the technology now to be able to actually like explore these ideas and these concepts and this artwork and this world in such a much more refined way that it's like it's the same movie. We're gonna do the exact same movie, but just we're gonna make it so much more what it deserved to be than what it was in 1982, which isn't a knock on the film at all. In
But
1982, for
that's
what they
I
could do, it is insanely cool.
and
It is
it's like
insanely
it's like
impressive to see.
I think it was $32 million budget back then. But even then, it's like what they do with the movie now. I think it was Nicholas Stoller of all people who I heard say it first, but he's not the first person to say it. Is that anytime you make a sequel, it has to be more of the same, but not really the same, right? It's like you kind of have to give them the same beats. You heard me
Like almost
talking
the
about it
same
on,
movie, but like, yeah, like just slightly different. Like you have to make the same movie again with a very different story, just a very similar premise.
and we see different people tackle it different ways. Nolan, he went from like, origin story with Batman Begins, and then it became like full on heat, crime drama, crime film, right?
Mhm.
With 1,000 characters, and it's fantastic. But I love that. I honestly I agree. I agree. But
I think,
if you go to the books, they're both 5 stars for me.
yeah, they're both very impressive movies.
And they like I said, they live with me. I have these ruminating thoughts that come from that movie, both movies, and I find a respect for that. And it's like you said, if you are looking for it, if you're like your heart and mind are like trying to get into it, you're gonna get into it. That's all it is.
Mhm.
Okay. My soapbox take for Blade Runner is not even about the movie. Ridley Scott, since 1979, has been standing on business, and y'all don't give this man his credit. That's all I gotta say. I don't need to
Just
say anything
influenced
else.
so much.
Put some respect on Ridley Scott's name. That's it. Because
I feel like Ridley Scott at this point has become something of I mean, everyone kind of knows his name. Like you go to any movie that has a trailer for him in it, Gladiator, even whenever it was what was it, Napoleon? There
yeah,
was this quote from visionary director Ridley Scott. And like even whenever I went to go see Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes the other day, there
Yeah.
was I can't tell if it was before or after, but there was a name drop for Ridley Scott in the trailer as executive producer. But I remember
Oh,
telling my partner immediately after it showed up on screen, I was like, the fact that they are like putting his name on screen before Fede Alvarez's, I think, or it may have been
yeah.
the other way around. But I was like, this is insane. Like that's how you market a movie.
But it's I don't know because it's like they always throw around other names. You throw around the Marty, the Spielberg, and all that, and he very much is that class of director, in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
And that being said, the Oscars, bro, the Oscars. This is 1982, 1983 year of Oscars. Did this movie get any Oscars? Did it deserve any? Let's talk
I
about
think it
the
deserved a few
Oscars.
more nominations at least.
So the nominations they did get was for art direction and set deck, and like I said, Lawrence G. Paul, production design. He got that. Paul, he actually worked with Bob Zemeckis, Romancing the Stone,
Mhm.
Back to the Future. Obviously, iconic work when he works with he links up with the right people.
I think Oscar wise, it definitely like deserved those two nominations, but it also deserved like I think
Oh
screenplay,
yeah, the
adapted
next one was
screenplay.
costume design. It was Charles Node and Michael Kaplan. They did
It
costume
got
design.
two nominations, dude. That's crazy. Two nominations for
and
this.
and and that's the thing. It's like now we look back at it and no offense. Okay. Think of if 1982. What movies are you thinking of? No, genuinely. Can you think of any other movie from 1982? I don't know how your mind is because I can't.
I hold on. Let me look up the 1983
The
Best Picture
Verdict,
nominees.
E.T.,
What's
you have
crazy is
Dark
that like I know that there's other movies out there that definitely
48
released that
Hours.
year.
But it's like if I think of 82, it is very much Blade Runner for me.
Oh well, Blade Runner was released in 1982, but the Best Picture nominees for the next year would have been The Verdict, E.T., Missing, Tootsie, and Gandhi.
Yep.
Which, like, I get it. Maybe just switch out one of these.
I would have switched it out. Hey, Tootsie's good, but it ain't that good, bro.
I haven't even seen Tootsie.
I mean, great director, great work, but it's like,
It's not Blade Runner. It's not
it
Blade
ain't
Runner.
Blade Runner. It ain't the text of Blade Runner. And obviously, Vangelis' score should have been there. That's not even that's a no brainer right there. It's like things were back, different back then, but it's like very much this is a movie where it's like the legacy, the artistry itself is something that has been.
Cinematography as well.
Oh yeah,
Should have gotten cinematography.
Jordan Cronenworth, I don't know, people probably don't know this, but it's a very tragic thing what happened to him. And Jeff Cronenworth, obviously his son, he's worked with David Fincher quite a few times, but Jordan Cronenworth, he while they were shooting this movie, and this is a testament to Ridley Scott as a human being, was that he started getting symptoms of Parkinson's and he didn't know that he had Parkinson's. And he was very much dealing with that in real time, making Blade Runner. And even though he had all these health issues, Ridley Scott wasn't like, oh, get out. I don't need you here, right? He kept him on and he let him actually do work, right? And this is one of the best things ever done when it comes to cinematography, right? And
Do you
imagine if he
remember
had the capability to do so, he would have done so many great things.
do you remember that movie that I showed you at the Videodrome? Like State of Grace, that mob movie I told you about, the Irish mob?
Yep.
He shot
Yeah,
that
yeah.
movie as well.
Of course he did. Of course he did. That's awesome. I have to check that one out too, obviously. But Jordan Cronenworth, 100%. Because like that's not even like a thing where it's like, oh, he should have won that year. Like his work, and I think the work of this movie supersedes, even the Oscars. Like this is literally one of the, if you wanted to say a Rushmore movie, this is one of those movies that goes up like, oh, look at that. That's Blade Runner right there. Go check
Mhm.
that out. Like this literally is a historical movie in every single context. Like come back to this in 50 years, that's still going to be something that we're talking about.
For sure. I like Jeff Cronenworth quite a bit. He
I
had a lot
was
of videos towards the end of his career, looks like.
Yeah, Jeff does a lot of commercials and stuff like that after he's not working with Fincher anymore. Claudio Miranda actually he was a gaffer for Jeff Cronenworth. You know those can lights that they have in a Blade in a Fight Club?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
lights
yeah.
in the Fight Club. He's the one who came up with that idea, and he was like, "These things cost like $3. We can light this. It's gonna look fantastic." And they're like, "Okay, okay, we'll do
We'll trust you. All
it."
right, we'll do it. It's David Fincher.
But it's like, oh, got nothing but love. It's like you cannot put into like in is there's certain movies once in a while, like once you see them. Mad Max Fury Road, obviously, it's an episode that we're just doing, and that's a movie that comes out at this level for me, where it's like the brazen boldness of this movie has affected filmmakers, it's affected audiences, and I think it's going to keep doing so.
Again, Mad Max is insane too.
Johnny Seal. I would recommend Deacon's podcast to listen to John Seal talk, and you're just be like, bro, this dude is so cool. Like just his
He's
entire career.
cooking. He's
He's just
cooking.
but he's got that Australian, like that
Oh
Aussie
yeah.
vibe. He's just a cool dude. But speaking of all this time that's passed, legacies through the prism of time. Obviously, it's been about 45 years since this movie came out. What pops up to you? We're talking about already Jordan Cronenworth. We talked about, Ridley Scott, but what comes out to you in terms of legacies for all the people behind the camera, in front of the camera? What's up?
It's interesting because I looked at all of the like filmography work and kind of the like filmography of everybody involved, and it feels like the only people who have had a real like boost to their career after this was Harrison Ford.
But it's like he's literally just straight peaking for like 2 decades, right? Within
For
this
like
era.
2 decades he was working. Ridley Scott, obviously, even the screenplay, like Hampton Fancher and David Webb Peoples, like both of them, neither of them got like huge jobs. Like they were really small, like little bits and pieces here and there. I would have thought that Sean Young would have had a better career, but for some reason she just didn't. Like she wasn't even in the
Women
second movie.
women don't get, they don't get their credit in the first place.
Even the second movie, they CG'd her. Like they,
And she said she didn't exactly have a great experience doing that.
yeah,
And I mean, they
um,
needed the CG for the story that they're telling for that, like, that moment or whatever. But even then, it's
yeah,
like, it doesn't hurt to show her age.
yeah. I understand where that came from for the purpose of the story, but yeah. But even then, you got Rutger Hauer, who's in Batman Begins. Didn't
I
you get the
feel
memo?
it might be a crime that we didn't talk about Rutger Hauer, honestly.
Oh, I mean, it's okay. I'm sure we'll talk about him plenty, but he's great. He's awesome.
Yeah.
He's an incredible actor. Edward James almost kind of had a decent career. Emmett
Yeah.
Walsh, I think, might have had the best career out of everybody
Yeah.
in the cast. That
But a
and he
lot of
just died
consummate
this year
character
too.
actors, right? A
Hmm.
lot of
They're
character
really
actors
small,
just doing
like
their thing.
a lot of small ones that I guess you could say kind of like stood out to me. Joanna Cassidy, James Hong as Chu, dude.
Bro, one of the best actors of all time. Character actor, one of the
Five
best character actors.
5 minutes of screen time, and he steals the entire show. Yeah, I
100%.
love him.
They had him in a refrigerated set, and they're talking about it. Literally in that set, they're pumping there's pumping smoke and all this stuff, and literally they're like literally coughing up all this stuff, and it was craziness just trying to get even the vibes for that done. And obviously, people can go look that up on YouTube. They have the making of there. There's so many other, you know, they have a beautiful illustrated book about Blade Runner. I don't know if you read or did you see the thing I sent you from
I have.
Cinephilia and Beyond, one of my favorite websites. Every time I
I
talk about a movie, I have to go read what they said first, and I'm like, okay, this is a base. Let's go.
watch the movie with the commentary. It's so fun to listen to everybody talk about it. I love commentaries for Blu-rays. That's
Ooh,
the big reason I'm a huge collector.
yeah.
But yeah,
Is Ridley and then I guess a couple other people?
I have two different versions of the Blu-ray. Like I have the 4K and the Blu-ray, so I can't remember which one it is, but there's definitely one that has Ridley. It may have been
Okay,
the DVD. I can't remember.
I'll find it. And plus, people, they put them on like SoundCloud and stuff like that sometimes, but I'll definitely
Yeah.
find it. Obviously, I already talked about Philip K. Dick. Talk about the amount of like just the man had passed. Like I said, he passed away sadly before he could
Mhm.
even see the movie. And obviously, it's different from the story that he made. But talk about the amount of work that people have just made just from his stories. They literally made like an entire show just off the short stories themselves, right?
Yeah, it's
Have you
interesting.
seen Paycheck? That's a random one too from John Woo with Uma Thurman and Ben Affleck.
I've not. I need to like really sit down and watch some John Woo movies someday. There's
It's
been a few
it's
of
an
them,
American
but
one, but it's like it's very much Mission Impossible 2 vibes, but it's a little bit more fun, honestly, than Mission Impossible 2. And
I can see that.
Mission Impossible 2 is a little bit iffy, but the premise of Paycheck is fantastic. Aaron Eckhart's in that too. One of his better performances too.
I've seen a couple of his movies at that Story Went to Videodrome, and I've always wanted to pick him up, but I'm always like, I don't know. I don't really love his style for Mission Impossible 2, but it could just be because it's just like one of his only American movies.
Yeah, no, that's what it is. He gets nerfed when he comes to America. Same thing with Jackie Chan. That's why he doesn't make movies in America anymore. He 100% disagrees with the way that we make movies here, and I understand 100% why. And fun fact, Chad Stahelski did confirm that there was very serious conversations going on for John Wick 4 for the Donnie Yen character to be Jackie
Hmm.
Chan, but they had aged down the character. He was supposed to be more of a father figure to John, but then he ended up being a brother figure, so they brought in Donnie Yen instead of Jackie Chan.
I can
But
see that very much so.
yeah, that's what my listening habits are. Same thing as commentaries. I love listening to commentaries,
I'm the
man.
same way though. Like I'll just pick up like just random information like that from listening to commentaries or videos or interviews from people, and it's like this is how I get my information. It's just by like figuring out like who to listen to.
I love firsthand primary sources. I love those. Secondary sources work too, but there's a passion when it comes to, I mean, it depends on the passion, the intonation as, at which you're sharing the information. Sometimes when it comes to secondary sources, they might be a little bit uptight. That's all. When it comes
Yeah.
to some people that write articles, if the passion's not there or it's a book that's critiquing it, whatever. But I will say, I want to make a quick comparison. Legacy sequels, we've had quite a few that have happened where it's like, oh, they made a movie in the 80s, now they
Mhm.
made a movie in the 2010s or the 2020s. Besides Top Gun Maverick, Top Gun Maverick superseded the first movie, but I think with your soapbox take, I think you agree that Blade Runner 2049
100%.
in some ways did supersede Blade
I
Runner.
wanna say that there are very few, like, there's maybe 1 or 2 more that maybe did, like, not better, but lived up to the original one in terms of, like, a legacy sequel, but this is one of the first ones I remember thinking, like, "Holy shit," like, they did it, like, they were able to not only make one that is just as good, but just as, like, iconic and something that is as incredible as the first one.
And it's a thing. I think it's a thing where it's like they've got more time, more money, and then like every other luxury of like, oh, there was a first movie that created all these things, and then now you can improve upon it. And
Mhm.
I'll be the first one to say I love Tony Scott, but the text of Top Gun 1 is not really that depth. There's no depth there. And there's very simple ways within like action movies where you can add that depth in, whether
Very
it's an
simple
aging
ways.
character, things like that, making him more human. And they have that emotional investment within Top Gun Maverick. And I'd argue the emotionality that Denny has in Blade Runner in 2049 resonates a lot more with me. I think the story of like the effects that happen to the replicants in the first movie affects me a lot, but the actual narrative of like the main character is a
I
hundred
feel like
percent
the
better
second one is a
in the
lot more
second one.
emotional. It's
Yeah.
so much more emotional. I think that's why I like it more is because it takes all of the ideas and the concepts and the basic philosophies of the first movie that
Yep.
basically, like we said, more human than human. It basically adds all of that into this giant, already established world that you're just ready to get back into. And it's like, we're going to give you all of the same movies in the first one, but even more. Like, it's going to be so much more dense, so much more depth from everybody. It's just, I think, an all around, just a more emotionally investing film.
100%. And like I said, if I know, I don't even say I hope, I know people are going to come back to this, and the legacy of this movie is just going to grow. Both of the movies, it's just going to grow. So I always say KD, you to MVP, mom, like Kevin Durant. I don't know, but you're from Oklahoma. Are you an OKC fan? I don't
I'm
know if
from
you are,
Oklahoma. I was an OKC fan before that trader left us.
but it's like back then they had KD, they had Westbrook, they had Harden, right?
We
Imagine if
had
they had actually
KD, Westbrook,
Iguodala,
Harden, Serge Ibaka.
Ibaka, yup.
Yeah, we had everybody, bro.
But
Like that's
imagine if they had
that was
stayed.
a that was a that was a time when I actually like really liked sports for a while. Like I
Yeah,
only watched basketball and it was for them specifically. And then KD left, Westbrook left, Harden left, everyone left. So I was like, what's the point?
to this day, I still wear an OKC shirt, and it is 100% just because of that. Honestly.
I had a basketball signed by Westbrook. I met the dude.
That's awesome. I'm gonna send you a photo of a thing that's in my house, in my garage. It is literally, I can't even. It's bigger than my wingspan. It is that big. It's the poster of a Durant from my buddy used to work at a sports shop, and they had it there, and he just texted my brother like, "Yo, you want
Hmm.
this?" I literally have my brother has figurines of KD with the OKC uniform and all that. So we were big fans
Did
of
you ever
this
watch
house,
the KD movie?
bro. You, I know, I did.
I saw it in
Oh,
theaters. It was
bro,
wild. Everyone loved it.
it was whatever. It was fun time, but it's just watch Like Mike. I don't know what else to say.
Thunderstruck, I'm that's the deserved best picture winner right there.
Bro, no, I watched Like Mike because we actually get Jesse Plemons in that, and it's
Oh
awesome.
yeah, I forgot about that.
He's
I forgot
awesome.
he was in that.
But
Watch that.
you the MVP, mom, the MVP, who put the team on their back with this movie. That it's to the point where if they weren't present, this entire enterprise would have been lesser. Who's your MVP or MVPs? I give full reign with
I
that.
th- I think the writing here. I think it's from everybody. The screenplays, the
Philip
the
K. Dick.
the source material. Yeah, Philip K. Dick, Hampton Fancher, David Webb Peoples, Philip K. Dick. Those are the MVPs for me personally, because without that ideology and the philosophy, all of the, I guess you could say, efforts on everybody's part to kind of make this world as grand and as serious as it is all down to the writing for me. It works so well. Yeah, I'd say for me personally, I was gonna say like everybody if I could. I think so
Hey,
much of this movie is really
this
just firing
movie.
on all cylinders.
Yes, yes. This is a movie where it's like Ridley and everyone that I had mentioned with that team of like production designers, costuming, everybody is Sid Mead, everybody and everyone in between that team that Ridley had got together and really worked on this movie, frantically worked on this movie to get everything done. And obviously, script is key, right? And script is your
Hmm.
text, and you have to really follow that to some extent. But then when you like great directors, what they do is this right here, right? They go and they cultivate. It's like we have these seeds, and then now I have to grow this. I got to put some fertilizer on this. I got to put some Miracle Grow, and this is like not even Miracle Grow. This is like the steroids. This is like commercial grade times 1,000. What they're doing to make the plant, the blossom of Blade Runner come to life. Because, like I said, it's like this is one movie where you can be like, oh, y'all just right, y'all ripping off Blade Runner, y'all ripping off Blade Runner. You know how many movies have ripped off Blade Runner? It's like I watched Jaws and like North by Northwest. I was watching North by Northwest, listening to like Bernard Herrmann's like music, and I'm just like
Uh-huh.
the genius. I know this is one of the first times they did this level of music of like use of score, absence of score in every single little beat, and you can see the influence of that in whether it's John Williams or it goes all the way to like Mission Impossible. Whenever it comes to entire genres of music, right? In even Vangelis with this, you could even put Vangelis on the record of being an
Hmm.
MVP.
I think there's so much of this, like when you take apart every single aspect of this film and you show it to anybody, it's like, look how cool this looks, like how insanely detailed this is. Like every single aspect of this film is just firing on every cylinder. There is so much happening at all times that like it's impossible to ignore any single aspect of it, whether it's the writing, the acting, the music, the direction, cinematography. Literally everybody involved in this is incredibly talented. I just love this movie.
100%. Usually I would like break it down to something like for Mad Max, obviously you have
Hmm.
like George Miller, but then for the screen you have Furiosa, right? Without that it doesn't work. But for me, my MVP was Margaret Sixel, right? The editor for the movie. The amount of editing that goes into that movie, it's a lot of editing, but is some of the most effective editing I've ever seen.
I was actually thinking about the editing for the Mad Max today, how he wanted someone else to do it that wasn't a man because he wanted a perspective that was fresh.
But the
That is
thing
just
was
like.
he what he says is I know like Margaret had never like edited an action movie, but she doesn't like to sit around. You know the way that Avery was talking about speed,
Mhm.
the exact same energy, and I think that's an energy you only get from women. You don't get it from men because for
Yeah.
us we're talking about Blade Runner, right? Where it's like we're letting
Yeah.
it ruminate. This movie is very much a meditation, a rumination, right? That happens in between the narrative plot, like I said, and I mean, we love it for it. And I'm sure, Avery and every other woman probably can find the text there for this too, but they wouldn't do it like this. That's why more women need to be behind the camera, in front of the camera, writing, producing, everything in between. I'm all for it, especially women of color. I get nerdy when it comes to that. I will say, and that's the thing. I think Ridley, he is a good coach, right? When it comes to directing, because obviously he had, a great thing with this. The Martian, he got a great text with that from like Andy Weir, Drew Goddard. But then talk about something like Gladiator, where they're shooting the movie, they're writing pages that they're going to do in 2 days or something like that. That is, and but he has Steve Zalian and these amazing writers that are even then. But he's like, emotionally, I know where I need to get, and I'm just going to do it. And to have
Yeah.
that level of confidence in any job, in any, especially, and he's growing as, in age, and he is so confident within the work that he does. It is always the writing though that it always comes back to, right? Because it's like,
I
the
agree.
writing
Yeah.
is not good, that really movie ain't gonna be good.
The writing ain't good. It's never good. It doesn't matter what you're doing with your movie. If the writing's not good,
Oh,
then
I
you're pretty
think
much screwed at that
every
point.
single, like, Spectre, the James Bond movie, that
Hmm.
movie left me in such a, like, I was so lost after thinking about that movie. I was like, okay, I enjoyed parts of this, but I'm like, okay, what is going on? What is going on? And I'm keep mulling about this movie for like 2 days. I'm like, oh, it's the writing. Like, the writing is literally, you have this good acting shot by Hoyte van Hoytema, edited by Lee Smith, directed by Sam Mendes. It all means jack because they didn't have a good script, right?
It's a messy script. It's very messy. I think it has good ideas. It's just not. It just wasn't refined enough.
Stories key. That's why it's like, I'll see a movie, I'll be like, y'all should have worked on the story. Like we talked about Monkey Man. I'm probably gonna cut this out, but we talked about Monkey Man. I'm like, okay, you have these fantastic points. You're trying to do this, but you're not going far enough with this. You're not explaining this enough. This feels a little hollow, because it's like, I love revenge movies. I'm talking about Gladiator, War for the Planet of the Apes. These are very big movies that are also revenge movies. And when it comes to the end of the movie, there's a emotional catharsis that happens that is very effective within those that I didn't see in Monkey Man. Because Monkey Man is practically forgettable, even though it's like of my culture, and I probably should be remembering it more. But I find a beauty when these guys have done it. I don't know what it
I
is.
feel like Monkey Man had a lot of influence in the sense that they probably didn't want to lean too much into the culture aspect of it because they knew that it was probably going to be a huge success with Western audiences if they just focused on action, which is unfortunate. I agree with you. I
Yeah,
kind of want
just
more
like,
of the story aspect of it,
and it's like, for
but
me, it's like, me and Dave got the same name. We got the same last name, but brother,
mhm.
we agree on a lot of things, but we don't agree on like some very fundamental things. And I would tell him to his face, and I feel like we'd have a great conversation about it. And he'd be like, "Yeah, yeah, I understand." I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that." We would learn from each other. Like, those are
Mhm.
I want to have those conversations. But Blade Runner, we got nothing but love for this movie. Do you have any companion movies that go with Blade Runner? Obviously, the big one that is like been sitting on us the entire time is Blade Runner
I'd say the
2049.
sequel for sure.
But
I
anything else?
don't know. I think sequels that or not sequels, but just films that have to do with sci-fi humanity, I think, are just the general consensus of what I'd say. Like, I would say Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris is probably the first one that comes to mind, mainly because that concept of empathy, who we are as humans, what makes us human, kind of is explored more in that movie as well. In that sense,
Tell me how I forgot the
um,
genius of Tarkovsky, man. I've said it like 1,000 times at this point that I rewatched Stalker, but it's like, I was like, oh, it's like this man in Russia had to reshoot this entire movie, but he never lost a piece of the sauce. That it's like, oh, we can have these. He's making a sci-fi movie even with that, right? And he
mhm.
explored Solaris, another fantastic sci-fi movie he made, and he explores all these different things. He poses all these questions. There's a lot of interesting things that are happening, and it transcends time. It transcends language. Great cinema comes from everywhere. I'm not talking
I
about
would say
Gudsney, okay?
the Gosney's great. Gosney's awesome. Gosney's a companion piece now. I would say like this one's not even sci-fi, but this one is kind of more on the empathetic side as well
Yeah,
as just being human, what it means to be human,
yeah,
how we kind of process things.
yeah.
Ryosuke Hamaguchi's Drive My
Drive My
Car.
Car. Yep.
I watched Evil Does Not Exist at the Atlanta Film Festival. Obviously, you were there that weekend that I was going to watch it. I don't
Yeah,
think I talked to you about it afterwards,
yeah, yeah.
but I immediately saw that and I was like, I need to watch Drive My Car again. Like I have it in my head right now. I need to watch it immediately. I need to find time to watch it this week. It's 3 hours
It's a
long, but
longer
my
movie. Yeah,
God, like it's I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, I bawled my eyes out crying just watching it. I was like, this is just such a perfect piece about humanity, what it
Yeah.
means to be human. Like, I just loved it so much. Yeah, I'd say that's a very good companion piece.
I think there's a lot of movies like across genres that talk about like humanity and maybe like dehumanization. You could go
Oh,
last year.
100%. There's
Last
more.
year, you could go Zone of Interest and Origin, Ava DuVernay's Origin. We
Hmm.
talked about even Memento, After Sun, even
After
Identity.
Sun is a very good, very
After
good at.
Born Identity even gets into like literally about identity, but it doesn't, spell out those themes. Elysium is one that is very much taken from Blade Runner, though, where it's like they're
Yeah.
literally the people are off world. Total Recall plays in the same sort of language.
Funny enough, you mentioned Elysium, but Neil Blomkamp, I didn't even think about it till now, but District 9 would have been like a
Yeah,
really good companion piece for this. Like you kind of have the same concept for the story if you think about it. Like you have a
yeah.
guy who's going after this sort of subsidiary of humans or aliens, I
And there's
guess
a
in
big
that sense.
company very much in the same sci-fi-ish world that Ridley plays into himself.
Big company that is trying to move a group of people and
It ends up being the
yeah, this is the
protagonist
same
that's
type of
going through a
movie.
very real situation again in that too, right? Not to spoil
Yeah.
District 9 if you haven't seen it. Check out District 9. It's one of the recent, sci-fi movies that very much goes up in, must watch, must recommend things.
District 9 was a movie that was a result of Halo not happening. I don't know if
Yeah.
anybody knows that. So that's another movie that Peter Jackson was involved in that
Yeah.
for some reason just had another director attached to it and then didn't happen.
Yep.
But yeah,
I got three very interesting companion movies that are like they're in the same. Two of them are kind of related, but they're not. The first one is of like personal memory. I watched Blade Runner, and then I had watched the Lethal Weapon movies, Richard Donner's Lethal Weapon movies right after that.
mhm,
And I remember listening to like there's certain moments within the first Lethal Weapon movie, a lot of them, but it's that saxophone, like this jazzy saxophone, and
oh yeah, yeah.
it's usually Danny Glover's who's just like sitting there just frazzled. But then I
Kind of
realized
has the same vibe,
it's
yeah.
the same vibe. It's very much,
It's a noir
faster
movie.
pace, but it's like very much a jazzy detective movie. That's what Lethal Weapon is. Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye, the
Mhm.
amazing Elliot Gould. That's more. They're more of a vibe there than story at times, but fantastic movie. Must recommend for me. And the last one, Dawn for the Planet of the Apes. I was waiting to say that for like 2 hours because you had mentioned it.
That I do think it does kind of fit in the same like I guess
Because
you could say like vibe.
because for me it's another story about where it's like the vengeance laid by humans where like they wronged these or
Uh-huh. These
it's replicants and
individuals.
that but in this is it's apes, right? And then it's
Mhm.
like they tested them, they gave the apes life, right? With the
Yeah.
shots and all that, and then they got freed, but they never forgot all this terrible stuff they've done to them, right? And that's very much what Koba's story, played by Toby Kebbell, fantastic performance, one of the best villains of the 21st century. Come at me with that, but Koba, that's his story in that movie, and it is tragic what happens in that movie, right? Where it's like humans and then the apes, they're trying to maybe we can coexist, but the actions from the humans beforehand affect Koba, and what Koba does ruins everything. And then now they've
Koba
gone,
strong.
bro. Ooh.
Koba strong. Caesar weak. Koba weaker.
Dawn for the Planet of the Apes coming soon on the pod. I at this point, like the forces of life want me to do it at this rate, man. But Blade Runner, I don't know. It comes back to Blade Runner, like good science fiction when it actually is good. It comes back to you, right? And obviously, talk about the Charleston, the OGs, the Charlton Heston, Blade, Planet of the Apes movies. They're dealing with great themes even then. A little bit cape stuff in there, but it's still a fun time. You're talking about was it Beneath the Planet of the Apes, where it's practically like a political thriller, right?
Dude, Beneath the Planet of the Apes has a nuclear bomb living below the Earth, and then they blow it up. And then if you watch the Escape for the Planet of the Apes, there is a scene like shot for shot that almost looks like it could be from Oppenheimer,
I love it, man.
where the monkeys are telling him like, "Yo, there was an atomic bomb down there."
And see, I don't know. It's maybe it's like who knows. Nolan was talking about Mirror from Tarkovsky, right? I mean, even though Mirror's not
Oh yeah,
necessarily
yeah,
related
mirrors.
to, I mean, because Mirror doesn't have there's no I don't know. There's a little bit less narrative within Mirror. I'd say like resolution wise. if that makes
It's
sense.
so strange to think about Tarkovsky's movies because it feels like there is so little
Abstract.
narrative in all of his movies
Yeah.
until you get to the end, and it's like, oh, this was this the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Tarkovsky's films.
And I might need to watch more Russian movies. I don't know what else to say. I have to see the Red Shoes. That's Russian, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's in
That
the
one's been
Criterion Collection.
that one's been sitting on my list for a hot minute. That's one of those movies where I'm like, I'm probably gonna love the crap out of that. It's just I gotta get in the right mindset to like engage with art that is that great. That's all. Like
Yeah,
Blade Runner, I've seen quite a few times, so it's like it's easy. Like I've already watched this,
it's easy to kind of just watch something once you've experienced it.
but
But like, I get
I
what
don't
you
want to
mean. When you know
disrespect
that
the
the movie is
movie.
going to be super heavy,
Or
yeah,
not even
yeah, you
heavy.
want
It's
to
just
set
like
aside time for it.
I want to like it's like when you go to the movie theater. Anytime I go to the movie theater, I'm sitting here, my phone is, besides I keep it
You're in the
on
zone. I
vibrate
get
now.
what you mean. You're in the
It's like
zone to watch
and
it.
I do that at home too. That's why it's like if you go to my letterbox, yes, it's sparse at times. I might be watching like rewatches that are like easy to pass off, but it's like when I hit them because I know like spiritually whatever my vibes are ready for that. Like I need it in my DNA. Come on, I
It
need it.
depends on what I'm watching, but most of the time, if I'm watching something that I have not watched before, I try to put my phone away so I don't get the tempt to watch, like to get my
Oh,
phone
I
up.
no, literally, even if it's a rewatch, depending on the not even depending. It's like if I'm rewatching a movie or watching a movie, I get a text or something, I'll pause it. But if it's a first watch, I won't even, depending on what it is, I won't even look at the phone. I'll just keep watching the movie.
Yeah, I'm the same way. If it's something I've watched a million times before, it's like, yeah, I'm just gonna watch this and be on my phone. And I'll text some friends back. But
Yeah.
there are some
I don't
movies
know.
that like I know I'm going to rewatch and I need to sit down and pay attention.
Yeah. But if it's like I'm rewatching like Mission Impossible Fallout for like the 20th time, I'm on my phone. Probably or like I'm
Yeah.
doing some other work and I'm gonna engage with this one scene and then I'm gonna get back in and then I'm gonna go back to this and go back and forth between like a work and then the movie or something. Some movies they're great for a vibe like that. It's like there's all sorts of movies that are made, and it's like I don't want to discount a movie that's this way or that way. It's like there's a utility to movies in our lives.
Oh, for sure.
But that being said, Blade Runner, it's just one of the best of all time, man. And I will say I left a lot on the paper. I wrote like 13 or 14 pages. And there's like I recommend for anyone to go, like I said, Cinephilia and Beyond. They have a copy of the illustrated version of Blade Runner. It's about like 100, 110, 115, something like that page little book that is like PDF scanned. It's just some fantastic visuals. Obviously, just go watch Blade Runner, live in this vibe because I do. And I love it. I'm glad
I'm
you've
gonna
been
live in
on,
that
man.
world.
I, I'm
I appreciate it.
I've been staring at your jaws 4K for like 2 hours, man.
I'll make sure to place it right behind me next time, like right here.
No, you know what Pat does sometimes? He'll just move stuff up and just like change it around. He's like, okay, let's do this now.
I actually do change a lot of these that are like facing the like camera just because I like to this sounds nerdy as hell, but I like to feel like I'm at a video store and I have options to pick from. I like to feel like there's some on display. So like anything new that I pick up, I try to put on like facing me or like
Yeah.
any new releases I'll have facing me. So like we have the color purple, Ferrari, Priscilla, Jaws. We got Munich up here. It's not new, but I haven't
Yes.
seen it yet. It's new to me.
Oh, you haven't seen Munich?
Um, I've not. I've not. That's why I picked it up. I
You've
was
at
like, I
least
got to
seen
get
that
it.
one shot, right? That one shot from Munich.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That gives you
That
enough
shot's insane. I
excuse to
see it
just
everywhere.
watch the movie. Where it's like, oh yeah, did y'all forget that like Spielberg is like the blocking goat of all time? And he'll just
Mhm.
like, oh guys, come on, let's just do this. And it's Spielberg, so
That's what I mean
you're
though,
gonna
is that
believe
like
in
something
him.
like that, like I wanna give it my time. So I would need to make time to like sit down and actually like pay attention someday.
Especially in the era we're living in right now, Munich is very much a piece that people should check out either way. But
Mhm.
it's been a fantastic time having you on for Blade Runner. You will surely be back on for something else. Or we're going to be back on for Blade Runner 2049. It'll
Of
probably be all
course, of
three of
course.
us. I'm a
If
force.
there's anything that you need me in between as well, just let me know. Shoot
Hey,
me a text. I'd be happy to join you for anything.
for me, it's always like I want to talk to people who really love this thing. And for us, we're pretty much people where it's like we really love a lot of movies. But this is one that very much sits on your letterbox. It's one that like you're always not necessarily always coming back to, but it's something that's present for you. It's like this is something
Mhm.
that I aspire to, right? And please, I'm rolling out the carpet very late, but plug everything.
I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter, which is called X now. No one calls it that. I'm on Letterboxd. My link tree is in all of them, but I'm pretty sure my Twitter is the one that I use the most. Really, like I have a huge problem with Twitter. Alejandro X Padi Padi at the end. So that's gonna be it. Is my link tree's in there.
And his link tree will also be in the bio for the pod. So please check that out because my brother right here is always doing something compelling. I can't wait to see the new short film. Obviously, we're going to be just talking. We're about to be doing Batman and everything that comes in between. We're going to have fun, man. I'm glad you're
Yeah, for
here
sure.
and we will have you on yet again. Bye,
I
everybody.
appreciate it, man.